The sky trembles, split by lightning as two titanic forces clash, gods and monsters locked in a struggle so vast it shakes the very foundations of the universe. This isn't just a scene from some blockbuster fantasy film. It's a moment pulled straight from the oldest stories humanity has ever told, myths of cosmic battles where the fate of worlds hangs in the balance. For thousands of years, cultures across the globe have imagined these epic confrontations, where order fights chaos, light battles darkness, and creation itself emerges from the wreckage of divine warfare. What is it about these myths that captivated our ancestors and still sends chills down our spines today? Picture this: whole pantheons of deities, each wielding power beyond mortal comprehension, locked in wars that reshape reality. The Norse spoke of Ragnarok, a final showdown where gods and giants would tear the world apart, only for it to rise anew. The ancient Sumerians sang of Marduk slaying the primordial dragon Tiamat, crafting the heavens and earth from her remains. Even now, these stories feel alive, not just as relics of the past, but as echoes of something deeper, something universal. They tap into our most primal fears and hopes, the struggle against forces greater than ourselves, the thin line between destruction and rebirth, the eternal question of how order emerges from chaos. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. 30 of the most breathtaking cosmic battles ever imagined, from cultures stretching from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica. These aren't just wild tales, they're windows into how our ancestors made sense of the universe, its mysteries, and their place within it. Some of these stories will feel hauntingly familiar, their themes woven into the myths and legends we still love today. Others will shock you with their raw power, their strangeness, their sheer audacity. So if you're ready to witness gods wielding storms, monsters rising from the void, and battles that decide the fate of existence itself, then buckle up. This journey through the most legendary clashes of the ancient world is about to begin. The very first cosmic war of Greek myth shook the heavens to their core, the Titanomachy, a decade-long cataclysm where the next generation of gods wrested control of the cosmos from their predecessors. At the heart of it all stood Zeus, though he wasn't always the king of Olympus. Born in secret to avoid being devoured by his father, the Titan Cronus, Zeus grew to challenge the old order. But overthrowing the Titans, that required more than just ambition. It demanded allies, weapons, and a war that would redefine reality itself. Here's how it unfolded. After freeing his siblings gods like Poseidon and Hades from Cronus's belly, Zeus rallied them against the Titans, but raw power alone wouldn't win this battle. Deep beneath the earth, imprisoned by the Titans themselves, lay the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants with an unmatched gift for forging divine weapons. Zeus freed them, and in gratitude they crafted his signature weapon, the thunderbolt, a force so devastating it could shatter mountains. Alongside them came the Hecatoncheires, hundred-handed monsters whose sheer strength tipped the scales of war. For 10 brutal years, the earth quaked as gods and titans clashed. Mountains became projectiles, oceans boiled, and the sky itself trembled under the onslaught. Zeus's thunderbolts rained fire upon the Titans, while Poseidon's trident stirred tsunamis to swallow their forces. Finally, the Olympians triumphed, and the defeated Titans were hurled into Tartarus, a pit so deep and dark even light feared to enter. There, bound in unbreakable chains, they would remain for eternity, their reign ended and a new age of gods born. This wasn't just a battle for supremacy. It was a mythic reflection of universal themes: youth overtaking the old, chaos giving way to order, and the violent but necessary birth of a new world. The Titanomachy didn't just shape Greek mythology. It set the stage for every divine drama that followed, proving that even gods must fight for their place in the cosmos. For the ancient Greeks, the aftermath of the Titanomachy wasn't just a story, it was written into the very landscape around them. When they felt the ground shake beneath their feet or saw plumes of fire erupt from distant mountains, they didn't see random natural disasters. They saw the restless fury of the imprisoned titans, still struggling against their chains deep in Tartarus. Every rumble of thunder, every burst of lava. That was Zeus's victory and the titans' defiance echoing across the ages. These myths didn't just entertain, they made sense of a world where the earth itself could feel alive and vengeful. But the symbolism runs even deeper. The Titanomachy wasn't just about explaining volcanoes. It became a blueprint for how the Greeks understood power, rebellion, and the fragile balance of the cosmos. The Olympians' victory wasn't just a change of leadership, it was the birth of a new moral order. Zeus didn't rule through raw strength alone. He embodied justice, law, and the idea that even gods must respect certain boundaries. This tension between chaos and order, rebellion and structure would echo through Western thought for centuries. You can see it in everything from medieval tales of fallen angels to modern stories of underdogs overthrowing tyrants. What's fascinating is how the myth refuses to paint the Titans as purely evil. Some, like Prometheus, would later side with humanity, challenging Zeus's authority in ways that blurred the lines between hero and rebel. That complexity hints at something profound. The Greeks understood that creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin. Without the Titans' fall, there'd be no Olympus. Without chaos, there'd be no order, and that's why these myths still resonate not as simple morality tales, but as mirrors to our own struggles with change, power, and the price of progress. Long before the fires of Ragnarok would consume the world, another divine war tore through Norse mythology, one that began not with hatred but with misunderstanding. The Aesir, gods of power and rulership like Odin and Thor, clashed with the Vanir, deities of fertility, magic, and the natural world. At first, it seemed a straightforward battle of strength against sorcery, but this conflict would twist into something far stranger, ending with an act so bizarre it could only belong to myth, a truce sealed with spit. The war erupted not from malice but from failed diplomacy. When the Vanir sent their emissaries, the wise Njord and his twin children, Freya and Freyja, to the Aesir's realm, tensions flared. The Aesir, suspicious of the Vanir's Seder magic, accused them of deceit and executed one of their messengers. Outraged, the Vanir retaliated, and soon the heavens shook with the sound of clashing spears and roaring spells. What's fascinating is how evenly matched they were. The Aesir's brute force met the Vanir's cunning enchantments, and neither side could gain the upper hand. Years of stalemate made it clear this war was pointless, so the gods did something unexpected. They declared peace not with a treaty, but with a ritual as grotesque as it was ingenious. Both sides spat into a shared vessel, mingling their saliva as a symbol of unity. But this wasn't just a gesture. From that mixture sprang Kvasir, a being of unparalleled wisdom, born from the essence of both tribes. His very existence was the war's truest resolution, a fusion of Aesir might and Vanir magic, proof that their strengths were better combined than opposed. Kvasir's story, though, takes a darker turn. His wisdom would later be stolen, brewed into the mead of poetry, a drink that granted inspiration to those who tasted it. Yet even in tragedy, the legacy of the Aesir-Vanir War endured. The Vanir, once outsiders, became honored members of Asgard. Freya and Freyja brought their magic into Odin's halls, and the two pantheons learned to rule together. This wasn't just a myth about conflict, it was a lesson in the cost of pride, the power of reconciliation, and the unexpected gifts that can emerge when enemies choose peace over war. The Aesir-Vanir War feels strangely familiar, not just as a Norse legend, but as an echo of divine conflicts told across the ancient world. When you look at the Titanomachy, where Greek gods overthrew their predecessors, or the Hindu churning of the ocean, where Devas and Asuras battled for the elixir of immortality, a pattern emerges. These aren't just isolated stories, They are part of a deeper, shared cultural memory stretching back to the Proto-Indo-Europeans, ancestors whose myths branched into countless traditions. What's remarkable is how each culture reshaped these cosmic wars to reflect their own values. Where the Greeks glorified decisive victory, the Norse chose something subtler, the messy, imperfect art of reconciliation. Take the aftermath. The Aesir didn't banish the Vanir to some dark pit, they invited them into Asgard as equals. Njord, Freya, and Freyja weren't merely tolerated, they became central figures in Norse worship. Freyja's magic, once feared by Odin's warriors, was now revered as sacred knowledge. Compare that to Zeus's merciless imprisonment of the Titans, or Indra's eternal rivalry with the Asuras, and you see the Norse world view laid bare. Conflict isn't about annihilation, but balance. Even their truce, sealed with something as humble as shared spit, speaks volumes. This wasn't a grand treaty signed in some celestial hall. It was a raw, almost primal act of trust, turning what could have been a symbol of disgust into the seed of something new. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. The Norse didn't just stop at coexistence. Kvasir, born from that mingled saliva, became a living testament to the power of synthesis, his wisdom so profound it transcended the divisions of his creators. In a culture where poetry was valued as highly as battle prowess, his story wasn't just a footnote, it was a lesson. True strength lies in blending opposites, in finding harmony where others saw only rivalry. You can trace this idea through Viking Age diplomacy, where blood feuds might end not with total victory, but with marriage alliances or shared oaths. The myth wasn't just explaining the gods, it was teaching mortals how to navigate a world where even enemies might one day be neighbors, and that's what makes these parallels so compelling. Whether you're reading about the Aesir-Vanir War, the Titanomachy, or the Mahabharata's divine schemes, you're seeing different answers to the same fundamental question. How do order and chaos, old and new, find their place in the cosmos? The Norse answer wasn't the thunderbolt or the trident, it was the spit bowl, the mead of poetry, the uneasy but enduring peace that followed the storm. In a land where winters were long and survival depended on cooperation, perhaps this myth was less about the gods and more about the people who told it, a reminder that even the fiercest wars must sometimes end with an outstretched hand. Before there was land or sky, before gods or mortals walked the earth, there was only swirling, endless salt water, the primordial chaos personified by Tiamat. In Babylonian myth, she wasn't just a goddess, she was the ocean itself, the mother of all things, her body a roiling expanse where life first stirred. But when her divine children grew restless, challenging the order she embodied, her love curdled into fury. What began as creation's cradle became the battlefield for existence itself. Tiamat's rebellion wasn't born of ambition, it was sparked by grief. After her mate Apsu, the freshwaters, was slain by their offspring for threatening to destroy them, her sorrow twisted into vengeance. She birthed an army of monsters, serpents with venom for blood, scorpion men, storm demons, each more terrifying than the last. To lead them, she crowned Kingu, her new consort, and placed in his hands the Tablet of Destinies, an artifact granting its holder authority over the cosmos itself. With it, the tides of war shifted. The younger gods, trembling in the shadow of her rage, knew they faced annihilation. Enter Marduk, a god of storms and sovereignty, untested but unshaken. He struck a bargain. If the gods granted him supreme authority, he would face Tiamat, armed with winds as weapons, tempests to fill her gaping mouth and render her monstrous invincibility useless. He rode into battle atop a chariot of storms. The clash was cataclysmic. Tiamat's roars split the heavens as she unleashed her legion, but Marduk's winds lashed like whips, binding her jaws open. In one decisive stroke, he loosed an arrow into her belly, tearing apart her form. Yet this wasn't just victory, it was reinvention. From Tiamat's corpse, Marduk sculpted the world. Her ribs became the vault of the sky, her weeping eyes the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates. even her vanquished horde found purpose. Marduk tasked some with guarding the underworld, while others became constellations, their chaos frozen into order. The Tablet of Destinies passed to him, legitimizing his rule as Babylon's patron deity. Here's what makes this myth so piercing. Tiamat isn't a villain, she's the necessary chaos from which creation springs. Marduk's triumph isn't just about power, it's about transformation. The Babylonians saw their world, the rivers, the stars, even the storms, as remnants of a divine struggle where violence and creativity were inseparable. Unlike the Greek or Norse wars, this wasn't a passing of the torch between generations. It was the moment the universe itself took shape, carved from the body of a goddess who was both adversary and mother. Every flood, every harvest, every night sky whispered her name. The slaying of Tiamat wasn't just a battle, it was the birth of the world as Babylon knew it. Every mountain, every river, even the stars themselves were fragments of that cosmic struggle, repurposed chaos given divine order. But what's truly astonishing is how this ancient Mesopotamian myth echoes through time, whispering into the ear of later traditions, including the Abrahamic faiths that would dominate the Western world. The similarities are too striking to ignore: a formless void, turbulent waters, and a divine force that tames disorder to shape reality. Take the book of Genesis. Before light, before land, there was only the deep, Teham in Hebrew, a word linguistically linked to Tiamat's own name. Like Tiamat's salt waters, this primordial abyss is neutral at first, neither good nor evil, simply the raw material of existence. Then, just as Marduk divided Tiamat's corpse to fashion the heavens and earth, the god of Genesis separates the waters above from the waters below, imposing structure on the formless. The parallels don't end there. Both stories feature a divine wind, Marduk's tempests, God's ruach hovering over the waters as an agent of change. Even the monsters lurking in Tiamat's ranks find their counterparts in biblical chaos creatures like Leviathan, the coiled serpent of the sea whom Yahweh must eventually subdue. This isn't coincidence, it's cultural DNA passed down through centuries of trade, conquest, and storytelling. The exiled Israelites who spent generations in Babylon would have encountered Tiamat's myth firsthand. Scholars argue they adapted these symbols, refining them to fit a monotheistic framework. Where Babylon had many gods clashing, Genesis presents a single sovereign deity. Yet the underlying tension remains. Creation isn't a peaceful act, but a violent imposition of order on chaos. The difference: in the Babylonian tale, chaos is personified as a grieving mother. In Genesis, it's an impersonal force, a canvas awaiting the artist's hand. What makes this connection so powerful is how it reshapes our understanding of these texts. They're not just competing doctrines, they're part of an ongoing conversation about how the universe began. Whether it's Marduk or Yahweh, the message is the same. Existence is born from struggle, and every ordered society, every sown field, every city wall is a small victory against the void. The Babylonians saw their world literally built from Tiamat's bones. The Hebrews saw their god speaking light into darkness. Both were grappling with the same awe-inspiring truth: creation isn't tidy. It's messy, fierce, and demands a reckoning with the untamed forces that came before. And perhaps that's why these myths endure. They don't just explain where we came from, they remind us how fragile our ordered world really is. Every flood, every storm, every eclipse could have been seen as Tiamat stirring in her grave or Leviathan testing his chains. Even now, when we face natural disasters or societal collapse, we're confronting the same primal fear: that chaos might yet swallow the world whole. These stories, whether carved on cuneiform tablets or inked on parchment, are more than ancient lore. They're survival manuals for the human spirit, teaching us that creation is always born from conflict. Every night, as the sun god Ra descended beneath the horizon, the most perilous journey in Egyptian mythology began: a voyage through the underworld where chaos itself slithered in wait. Apep, the serpent of oblivion, coiled in the darkness, thirsting to devour Ra's solar bark and plunge the world into eternal night. This wasn't just a battle, it was a ritual as old as time, repeated each twilight to ensure the sun would rise again. And standing between order and annihilation was Set, the god of storms, whose role as protector defied his later reputation as a villain. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Apep succeeded, the universe would unravel, crops would wither, time would stall, and the delicate balance of mad cosmic harmony would shatter, but Ra's crew was prepared. Alongside Set, gods like Isis and Bastet wielded magic and blades against the serpent's horde of demons. Even the souls of the dead, armed with ritual curses inscribed in the Book of the Dead, shouted spells to weaken Apep's coils. The battle raged through the 12 hours of night, a gauntlet of fire lakes and spectral armies, with Ra's bark as the fragile beacon of hope. Here's what's fascinating: the Egyptians didn't just tell this story, they lived it. Priests performed nightly rituals, burning effigies of Apep and reciting spells to aid Ra's victory. Temple walls depicted Set spearing the serpent, a reminder that even the most tumultuous gods had a role in preserving order. This myth wasn't passive entertainment, it was a communal act of survival, where every uttered curse and smashed pottery figurine was a strike against chaos. Yet Apep was never truly defeated. Each night the serpent returned, embodying the truth that chaos could never be eradicated, only held at bay. This cyclical struggle mirrored the Nile's annual floods or the desert's encroaching sands, predictable yet perilous, a force that demanded respect rather than conquest. In Apep's endless resistance, the Egyptians found a profound lesson. Their world wasn't built on permanent victories, but on daily acts of defiance against the void. Every sunrise was a miracle earned, not given, and that's why Set's role matters so much, often cast as the murderer of Osiris. Here he's the defiant guardian, his brute strength tempering Ra's radiant authority. It's a reminder that even the gods we label as destructive have their place in the cosmic order. Without Set's spear, Ra's light would be swallowed. Without chaos, there'd be no need for Maat. The Egyptians understood this duality better than most. Their pantheon thrived on balance, not purity. So the next time you watch the sun set, remember, somewhere in the mythic dark, a storm god and a serpent are locked in a dance as old as time, and the world turns because they never stop fighting. The battles between the Devas and Asuras weren't just conflicts. They were the rhythm of the cosmos itself, a cycle as inevitable as the tide. In Hindu mythology, these two factions weren't simply good versus evil. The Devas, luminous and celestial, embodied order and divine authority, while the Asuras, though often labeled demons, represented raw power, ambition, and the untamed forces of creation. Their wars weren't fought over land or treasure, but over something far more precious, the nectar of immortality, Amrita, which promised invincibility to whoever possessed it. And the most legendary of these struggles, the churning of the ocean of milk, a cosmic tug of war that would redefine both sides forever. The story begins with a rare moment of unity. Facing a common enemy, the creeping decay of the universe, the Devas and Asuras agreed to a temporary truce. Together, they would churn the primordial ocean to extract Amrita, along with other divine treasures hidden in its depths. Using Mount Mandara as a churning rod and Vasuki, the king of serpents, as a rope, they pulled back and forth, their combined efforts shaking the foundations of the world. But cooperation between these eternal rivals was never going to be simple. The mountain began to sink into the ocean, threatening to undo everything. Vishnu, the preserver, took the form of a giant tortoise, Kurma, diving beneath the waves to stabilize the mountain on his back. Even then, the ocean's churning unleashed both wonders and horrors. The wish-fulfilling cow Kamadhenu, the goddess of wine Varuni, the deadly poison Halahala, a toxin so potent it could end all life. Shiva, the destroyer, intervened, swallowing the poison to save creation, his throat turning blue from its venom. Finally, after centuries of effort, the treasures emerged, including the coveted Amrita. But the fragile alliance shattered the moment the nectar appeared. The Asuras, seizing the pot, fled with their prize. Vishnu, ever the strategist, transformed into Mohini, a mesmerizing enchantress who tricked the Asuras into handing over the Amrita. By the time they realized the deception, the Devas had already consumed it, tipping the balance of power in their favor. The war resumed, fiercer than ever, but with a crucial difference: the Devas, now immortal, could never be fully overthrown. Yet this myth isn't just about victory or deceit. It's a meditation on duality, how opposing forces, however hostile, rely on one another. The Asuras, though cast as adversaries, were essential to the churning. Without their strength, the Devas could never have retrieved the nectar. Even Vishnu's trickery underscores a deeper truth. In Hindu cosmology, chaos isn't the enemy of order but its counterpart, each giving the other meaning. The Asuras' defeat isn't permanent. Their cyclical battles continue across the ages, mirroring the universe's own rhythms of creation, destruction, and renewal. What's striking is how these themes echo beyond myth. The ocean's churning mirrors the human struggle to extract wisdom from chaos, to find moments of unity even in division. The temporary alliances, the shared sacrifices, the inevitable betrayals, they feel less like divine drama and more like reflections of our own world, where cooperation and conflict are two sides of the same coin. The Devas and Asuras remind us that even the brightest light casts a shadow, and that immortality, like power, is never absolute, only borrowed, fought over, and endlessly contested. To the ancient sages of India, the wars between Devas and Asuras weren't just celestial conflicts, they were mirrors held up to the human soul. Vedantic philosophy peeled back the layers of these myths to reveal something profound. Every battle between light and darkness, order and chaos, was also a map of the inner terrain. The Devas represented the higher faculties: reason, virtue, self-discipline, while the Asuras symbolized the raw, untamed impulses lurking within every mind. This wasn't mere symbolism, it was a spiritual call to arms. The real war wasn't fought in the heavens but in the quiet moments of choice, where every individual grappled with their own Devas and Asuras. Take Dharma, the cosmic law governing duty and righteousness. In the Mahabharata, even the god Krishna, an avatar of Vishnu, doesn't promise victory to the good Pandavas without cost. Their struggle against the Kauravas, who blur the line between Asura-like ambition and outright adharma, forces hard questions: when is war justified? How does one balance mercy with justice? The Devas battles teach that Dharma isn't a fixed path but a dynamic tension, like the churning of the ocean itself. Sometimes preserving cosmic order requires swallowing poison, as Shiva did. Other times it demands deception, like Vishnu's Mohini guise, the lesson. Absolute purity is impossible and perhaps undesirable in a world where even the gods must bend. This duality resonates deeply in yoga and meditation traditions. The Katha Upanishad describes the self as a chariot. The body is the carriage, the mind the reins, the senses the horses, and the Atman, the true self, the passenger. The Devas and Asuras, they're the constant tug of war between focus and distraction, stillness and chaos. When Arjuna falters on Kurukshetra's battlefield, paralyzed by moral doubt, Krishna's Bhagavad Gita sermon reframes the conflict. The war isn't about killing kin but slaying ignorance, the ultimate Asura. Every act of mindfulness, every breath controlled in pranayama, becomes a miniature triumph of Deva over Asura within. Yet Vedanta avoids simplistic moral binaries. The Asuras aren't evil, they're necessary. Just as the ocean of milk yielded poison before Amrita, spiritual growth demands confronting shadow as much as light. Tantric traditions take this further, embracing Asuric energies as transformative fuel. The goddess Kali, fierce and bloodied, isn't a demon but the ultimate destroyer of ego, her sword cutting through illusion. Even Ravana, the archetypal Asura king of the Ramayana, was a devout Shiva devotee, his brilliance twisted by unchecked desire. These stories reject easy villainy, showing how the line between diva and asura often blurs within a single heart. That's the true power of these myths. They don't just depict gods at war, they invite us to witness the battles within ourselves. The nectar of immortality isn't a physical elixir but self-realization, the hard-won wisdom that comes when we stop projecting our struggles onto the cosmos and start facing them head-on. Every time we choose patience over anger, compassion over greed, we reenact the churning of the ocean, turning the raw materials of our nature into something transcendent. The Devas and Asuras remind us, enlightenment isn't a passive state but a daily siege against the chaos within, where every small victory inches us closer to the divine. The winds howled across the emerald hills of ancient Ireland, carrying whispers of a coming storm, not of weather but of war between two races so powerful their clash would echo through the ages. On one side stood the Fomorians, monstrous beings of the deep, their forms twisted by the sea's cruelty, their rule as heavy as the chains they forged. One-eyed Balor, their king, could wither entire armies with a glance from his venomous eye. Opposing them rose the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Donu, radiant with otherworldly grace and wielding gifts no mortal hand could craft. Their arrival wasn't just an invasion, it was a reckoning. This wasn't a war won by brute strength alone. The Tuatha De's triumph came from something far more potent, mastery of the arts. 4 treasures they brought, each a marvel of divine craftsmanship. From Phaleas came the Stone of Fall, which would scream beneath the feet of Ireland's true king. From Goria's the Spear of Lug, which thirsted so fiercely for battle it had to be soaked in poppy milk to calm its rage. The Sword of Nuada from Findia's could cut through any foe, while the Cauldron of Dagda from Muria's ensured no warrior ever left its brim unfed. These weren't just weapons, they were embodiments of sovereignty, justice, and abundance, virtues the Fomorians had long suppressed. But the true turning point came with Lug Lamfada, the radiant youth whose arrival at the court of Nuada shifted fate itself. When the gatekeeper demanded his skill, Lug listed them all: smith, warrior, harper, poet, healer, cupbearer. But we already have each of those, scoffed the guard. Lug's reply silenced him. Do you have any one man who possesses them all? Here was the Tuatha De's secret weapon, versatility, the ability to weave many arts into a single, unstoppable force. Where the Fomorians relied on terror and tyranny, the Tuatha De thrived through synthesis, their magic as fluid as the land itself. The final battle at Mag Tuaid was a spectacle of chaos and cunning. The Dagda, with his club so massive it dragged trenches in the earth, wielded it not just as a weapon but as a plow, turning the very soil against the Fomorians. Lug, confronting his own grandfather Balor, used slingshot to drive the king's deadly eye backward through his skull, turning its power against his own ranks. And when the dust settled, the land itself seemed to sigh in relief, the rivers running clearer, the forests breathing freer. Yet the Tuatha De's victory wasn't about annihilation. Even in defeat, some Fomorians, like the Smith-Brez, were spared, their knowledge absorbed into the new order. This wasn't just conquest, it was transformation, a reminder that even the darkest forces have something to teach. The Fomorians represented the untamed wild, the chaos of storm and famine, while the Tuatha De embodied the delicate balance between civilization and nature. Their war wasn't fought to erase one for the other, but to find a harmony where both could exist, if not in peace, then in wary truce. To the Celts, this myth wasn't just history, it was a reflection of their own world. The Fomorians were the crashing waves that swallowed shores, the harsh winters that tested survival. The Tuatha De, the skilled hands that turned peat into warmth, the harps that turned grief into song. Every craft mastered, every story told, was a small victory against the formless dark. And in the end, that's what these cosmic battles are really about. Not the clash of gods, but the eternal human struggle to shape meaning from chaos, one skill, one story, one defiant act of creation at a time. The storm god Susanu was exiled from heaven in disgrace, his wild temper and unchecked chaos too much even for the celestial planes. But when he descended to the earthly realm of Izumo, he stumbled upon a scene that would rewrite his legacy, a grieving family preparing to sacrifice their 8th daughter to a horror from the deep. Yamata no Orochi, the 8-headed serpent, had already devoured 7 of their children, its massive coils crushing forests, its venom fouling rivers, and its hunger insatiable. Here, in the shadow of this abomination, Susanu saw not just a monster to slay, but a chance to reclaim his purpose through an act of calculated cunning rather than mindless destruction. He struck a bargain with the terrified parents, spare their daughter's life, and he would rid them of Orochi forever. But confronting the serpent head-on would be suicide. Each of its 8 heads breathed poison, its 16 eyes missed nothing, and its scaled hide deflected blades. So Susanu turned to trickery, the same chaos that once got him banished now weaponized for salvation. He ordered the family to brew vast vats of the strongest sake, enough to intoxicate a god, then placed them on platforms between 8 gates. When Orochi came, lured by the scent of alcohol, each head plunged into a different vat, gulping until the beast swayed drunkenly, its movements sluggish, its senses dulled. Seizing the moment, Susanu drew his sword and severed each head one by one, then hacked apart the thrashing tails. But as he cleaved the 4th tail, his blade struck something unyielding, a legendary sword buried within Orochi's flesh, the future Kusanagi note Tsurugi. This wasn't just a weapon, it would become one of Japan's 3 sacred treasures, symbols of imperial divinity alongside the mirror and jewel. In that instant, the storm god's victory transcended mere monster slaying. It became a foundational act linking myth to monarchy, chaos to order. The aftermath rippled through Japanese culture. At the grand shrine of Izumo, priests still reenact Susanu's triumph in rituals, symbolizing the taming of nature's fury. The Kusanagi sword, housed at Atsuta Shrine, represents not just martial power but the emperor's divine right to rule, a lineage tracing back to the sun goddess Amaterasu, ironically Susanu's own sister, whose rift with him began this saga. Even the sake used to weaken Orochi lives on in Shinto ceremonies, where offerings of rice wine bridge the human and divine. What makes this myth so enduring is its moral complexity. Susanu isn't a flawless hero but a reformed disruptor, his victory earned not through purity but by harnessing his flaws for good. Orochi, meanwhile, embodies both mindless destruction and unintended generosity. Its body yielded sacred regalia, just as storms bring rain after devastation. This duality mirrors Japan's own relationship with nature, respectful yet pragmatic, revering its power while finding ways to survive its wrath. The serpent's demise wasn't the end of chaos, but the beginning of a balance between turbulence and tranquility, where even a storm god could find redemption through one selfless act. Susanu's triumph over Orochi wasn't just a thrilling monster-slaying tale. It was a masterclass in Shinto purification, a ritual cleansing woven into the very fabric of the myth. When the storm god first arrives in Izumo, he doesn't just stumble upon a grieving family. He enters a space thick with kegare, the pervasive spiritual pollution that builds from death, decay, and imbalance. Orochi, with its venomous breath and ravenous hunger, isn't merely a physical threat but a manifestation of this defilement, a corruption so deep it demands not just destruction but harrier, ritual purification. And Susanu, despite his own chaotic nature, becomes the unlikely agent of restoration. Consider the sake. In Shinto tradition, alcohol isn't just a drink, it's a sacred offering, a conduit between the human and divine. By intoxicating Orochi, Susanu doesn't merely weaken the beast, he transforms the sake into a tool of Oharai, the great purification ritual. The serpent's drunken stupor mirrors the way kegare is symbolically neutralized in ceremonies, its malady diluted until it can be safely expelled. Even the act of decapitation carries ritual significance. In Shinto practice, severing ties with impurity often involves symbolic cutting, like the Shime-Nawa ropes that mark sacred spaces, boundaries where chaos is held at bay. Susanu's sword strikes don't just kill Orochi, they sever the land's connection to its spiritual poison, allowing renewal to take root. The discovery of the Kusanagi sword takes this further. In Shinto, weapons aren't just instruments of war but Shintai vessels for divine energy. By drawing the sword from Orochi's flesh, Susanoo performs a kind of spiritual alchemy, extracting purity from defilement. This mirrors real-world rituals where objects polluted by death or disaster are meticulously cleansed and repurposed, their kegare transmuted into sacred power. The sword's eventual enshrinement as an imperial treasure underscores this duality. What was once tainted by the serpent becomes a symbol of celestial authority, proof that even the darkest corruption can yield divine gifts. Modern Shinto practice still echoes this myth. At the Ohari festival, priests wave haregushi paper streamers attached to wooden wands over crowds to symbolically cut away kegare, much like Susanoo's blade severed Orochi's heads. The sake offerings at shrines, they hearken back to the vats that felled the serpent, a reminder that purification isn't about denial but transformation. Even the way worshippers rinse hands and mouths at Temazuya before entering shrines reflects Orochi's defeat, water washing away impurity, just as the myth's resolution washed the land clean. What's profound is how Susanoo's own arc mirrors this cycle. Once a bringer of kegare himself, his rampages in heaven caused such pollution that Amaterasu hid in a cave. He redeems himself by mastering the very chaos he once embodied. In Shinto, gods aren't perfect, they're forces that must be balanced, and Susanoo's story teaches that even turbulence, when rightly directed, can restore harmony. The lesson lingers in every ritual. Purification isn't about erasing darkness but acknowledging it, confronting it, and finding the sacred within the storm. The Olympians had barely caught their breath after toppling the Titans when a new threat erupted from the blood-soaked earth, literally. Where drops of Uranus's severed flesh had fallen, the giants sprang forth, towering monstrosities with serpentine legs and strength to challenge the gods themselves. This wasn't merely another war, it was a primal uprising, the Earth's vengeance against the sky. The Gigantomachy, the battle of giants, would test the Olympians like never before, revealing a startling truth. Even gods needed mortals to secure their destiny. Athena, wisdom incarnate, faced the fire-breathing Enceladus, whose very footsteps triggered earthquakes. Their duel wasn't just brute force, it was a clash of elements. Enceladus hurled molten boulders while Athena countered with strategy, driving him across the sea to Sicily. There, she didn't just defeat him, she imprisoned him beneath Mount Etna, turning the volcano into his eternal prison. To this day, locals say Etna's eruptions are Enceladus struggling beneath Athena's shield, his fiery breath seeping through the cracks, but the real surprise. The gods couldn't win alone. An oracle decreed that only with the aid of mortal heroes could the Olympians prevail. Enter Heracles, the demigod whose arrows dripped with hydra venom, the one weapon that could permanently kill a giant. With each shot, he proved that divinity alone wasn't enough. Human courage was the missing ingredient. Dionysus, too, wielded a Theseus staff wrapped in ivy, using ecstatic madness as a weapon, while Hephaestus buried giants under avalanches of molten metal from his forge. Even the Fates joined, smashing giants with bronze cudgels. What makes this myth so pivotal is its irony. The giants, born from the earth's defiance of heaven, were ultimately toppled by the very mortals they scorned. Their defeat cemented a new order, not just gods ruling over nature, but gods and humanity intertwined, their fates knotted together. The Gigantomachy wasn't just about victory, it was about collaboration, the acknowledgement that even the mightiest powers rely on the seemingly small to endure. And perhaps that's why temples across Greece depicted this battle on their friezes. a reminder that when the earth shakes and monsters rise, gods and mortals must stand shoulder to shoulder or fall apart. The heavens were never still in Aztec myth, not when Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl waged their eternal game of creation and ruin. These weren't just gods, they were opposing forces woven into the fabric of existence itself. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, embodied chaos, change, and the jagged truths no one wanted to see. His namesake mirror didn't reflect mere faces. It showed souls stripped bare, revealing ambitions and lies with brutal clarity. Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, was his perfect counterpoint, god of wisdom, winds, and the delicate art of civilization. Together, they didn't just rule the cosmos, they tore it apart and remade it again and again, in a cycle as relentless as the turning stars. Their first world ended in jagged teeth, when Tezcatlipoca lured Quetzalcoatl into drunkenness, shaming him into exile. It wasn't just a divine falling out, it was the unraveling of an era. The sun vanished. Jaguars, creatures of Tezcatlipoca's night, swarmed from the darkness to devour every last human. The message was unmistakable. Without balance, even the greatest civilizations crumble. But Quetzalcoatl returned, and with his brother's grudging aid, they birthed a new world. This time, it was Quetzalcoatl who overreached, crafting humans so virtuous they threatened the god's supremacy. Tezcatlipoca responded with famine, reducing the land to dust. Then came the age of rain floods so vast they swallowed mountains, followed by the era of wind, where hurricanes scoured the earth clean. 4 times they built, 4 times they destroyed. What's striking isn't just the scale of their conflict, but its intimacy. Tezcatlipoca once tricked Quetzalcoatl into gazing into his obsidian mirror, exposing the serpent god's own hidden flaws, his vanity, his pride. Yet when Quetzalcoatl journeyed to the underworld to gather bones for a new humanity, it was Tezcatlipoca who helped him, however reluctantly. Their relationship was less about victory than tension, each needing the other to play their role. The smoking mirror thrived on upheaval, but without the feathered serpent's order, chaos had no meaning. Quetzalcoatl dreamed of harmony, but without Tezcatlipoca's disruptions, stagnation would suffocate all life. This duality pulsed through Aztec daily life. Tezcatlipoca's priests wore black, their rituals tinged with blood and penitence, while Quetzalcoatl's temples gleamed white, centers of learning and artistry. Yet during the New Fire ceremony held every 52 years to stave off apocalypse, it was Tezcatlipoca who was invoked first, his chaos acknowledged as the necessary prelude to renewal. Even the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, embodied this balance, a city of canals and floating gardens rising from a lake, a triumph of human ingenuity perched on the knife's edge of natural forces. Their final act, the fifth sun, the world we inhabit today, Quetzalcoatl, ever the creator, mixed his blood with ground bones to forge a new humanity. Tezcatlipoca, ever the provocateur, ordained that this sun would die by earthquake, a reminder that no order lasts forever. And so the cycle continues, not as myth but as lived reality. Every tremor beneath Mexico's volcanoes, every storm that lashes the Gulf Coast, whispers their names, 2 gods locked in a dance where destruction is neither good nor evil but the price of rebirth. The Aztecs didn't just worship them, they lived in the world Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl shaped, where every ending carries the seed of a beginning and every mirror holds 2 faces. Long before light and darkness became abstract concepts in philosophy, they were locked in a visceral, eternal war in the sands of ancient Persia. At the heart of Zoroastrianism stood the Devas and Ahuras, not just gods, but cosmic principles incarnate, their struggles shaping the very destiny of existence. The Devas, once revered in older Indo-European traditions, were now cast as demonic forces of deceit and ruin, while the Ahuras, led by the radiant Ahura Mazda, embodied truth, order, and the relentless fight against darkness. This wasn't just mythology, it was the world's first grand experiment in moral dualism, a battle where every human action tipped the scales of the universe. The conflict's roots run deep into the shared ancestry of Indo-European myths. Compare this to the Hindu devas and asuras originally flip-flopped in their roles. In Vedic tradition, the devas were celestial guardians, while the asuras, linked etymologically to the ahuras, represented chaotic might, but Zoroaster's revelation inverted this. His ahuras became divine, the devas corrupted. Why? Perhaps it reflected Persia's harsh landscape, where survival demanded constant struggle against drought and chaos. Or maybe it was Zoroaster's radical vision, a cosmos where choice, not fate, determined salvation. Unlike the Norse or Greek gods, who often warred for power or pride, Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, clashed over something far more profound, the soul of creation itself. This duality didn't stay confined to Persia. Its echoes rippled through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The fallen angel Lucifer, once God's brightest star, mirrors the diva's fall from grace. The apocalyptic battle of Armageddon, a direct descendant of Zoroastrian eschatology, where the final showdown between light and darkness would purify the world. Even the idea of a Messiah, the Saoshyant in Zoroastrian belief, who arrives to resurrect the dead and judge the wicked, feels hauntingly familiar. What began as hymns whispered around Persian fires became the scaffolding for Western morality, where every act of kindness or cruelty was no longer just personal, it was cosmic. Yet Zoroastrianism offered something radical for its time: hope. Unlike the cyclical wars of Hindu devas and asuras or the doomed Ragnarök of the Norse, this was a war that could be won. Humans weren't pawns but warriors, their daily choices fueling Ahura Mazda's light or Angra Mainyu's lie. Fire temples became fortresses of this ideology, the sacred flames not just symbols of purity but beacons rallying the faithful to the front lines. Modern passes still tend these fires, a living chain stretching back 3,000 years, proof that some battles outlast empires. What's mesmerizing is how this ancient framework still shapes us. Every time we frame a conflict as good versus evil, every time we believe our choices matter in some grand narrative, we're speaking Zoroaster's language. The devas and ahuras may have vanished from mainstream worship, but their war lingers in our stories, our politics, even our blockbuster movies where heroes rise against darkness, not because fate demands it, but because they choose to. And perhaps that's the most enduring victory of all, a myth so potent it taught humanity to see itself not just as observers of the divine, but as participants in its greatest battle. The struggle between light and darkness in Zoroastrian belief doesn't just play out across centuries, it builds toward an earth-shattering crescendo, a moment when time itself will split open and the universe is reborn. This is Frashocraty, the making wonderful, where the cosmic war reaches its final decisive battle. But unlike the nihilistic twilight of Ragnarök or the cyclical destructions of Aztec mythology, this is an apocalypse with purpose, not an end but a purification, a fiery rebirth that will leave the world perfected at last. Imagine a world where every lie, every drop of corruption, every shadow of suffering is burned away in a flood of molten metal. That's the central image of Frashocraty. According to the Bundahishan, Zoroastrianism's great cosmological text, a river of fire will engulf creation, a trial by ordeal for every living soul. The righteous will walk through unharmed, feeling only warm sunlight, while the wicked will be scoured clean by the agony of their own misdeeds. Even Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit himself, won't escape. His essence will be purged from existence, his chaos undone by the very order he spent eternity opposing. Yet this isn't just divine retribution, it's restoration. The earth itself will shake off its scars, mountains flattened, deserts bloom into orchards, and the dead rise from their graves in a grand resurrection. The Zoroastrian word for this moment, ristaxes, literally means the straightening of the bones, a visceral image of the physical world knit back together. Even the souls of the damned aren't lost forever. After enduring the molten river's cleansing pain, they too join the renewed world, their sins erased at last. What's startling is how active humanity's role is in bringing about this finale. Unlike passive observers in many eschatologies, Zoroastrians believe the Saoshyant, a messianic figure born from Zoroaster's own lineage, will lead the final charge against darkness. But he won't do it alone. Every person who ever chose truth over deceit, compassion over cruelty, becomes a soldier in this battle. The good deeds of millennia are like kindling stacked for a sacred fire, waiting for the spark that will ignite frashocracy. This vision left fingerprints across religious history. The idea of a final judgment separating righteous from wicked, the concept of bodily resurrection. Even the imagery of hellfire all have roots in Zoroastrian eschatology, carried westward through Jewish exiles in Babylon and filtering into Christianity and Islam. But what set frashocracy apart was its optimism. This wasn't doom for doom's sake, it was surgery on a cosmic scale, cutting away the rot so creation could heal. Modern Zoroastrians still mark the Fravadigan festival, honoring the spirits of the righteous dead who will one day return, their footsteps on the reborn earth as inevitable as dawn after the longest night. And perhaps that's why this ancient prophecy still resonates. In a world that often feels fractured beyond repair, frashocracy offers something rare, an apocalypse that's ultimately hopeful. Not a full stop, but a semicolon, a pause before the universe takes a breath and begins again, cleaner, brighter, and finally whole. The heavens of ancient Sumer were not always a place of divine harmony. They echoed with the furious cries of the Igigi, the lesser gods who toiled under Enlil's unrelenting command. For centuries, they dug canals under the scorching sun, hauled stones to build temples, and carried the weight of creation itself on their backs. But even gods have limits. When Enlil's demands grew unbearable, the Igigi did something unprecedented. They threw down their tools, ignited their divine torches, and marched on the great gods dwelling in a blaze of rebellion. The cosmic order trembled as they surrounded his temple, their chants shaking the foundations of heaven. For the first time in mythic memory, the divine workforce had unionized. This wasn't just a strike, it was a cosmic crisis. Without the Igigi's labor, the earth would fall into chaos. The gods, desperate for a solution, turned to Enki, the cunning god of wisdom and waters. His answer, a radical new creation, humans, mixing the flesh of a slain god with clay from the Abzu, the subterranean waters. Enki fashioned the first mortals, beings strong enough to bear the god's burdens, yet mortal enough to remain subservient. But there was a catch. To breathe life into these clay figures, the gods had to sacrifice one of their own. Jeshtu-E, a minor deity, volunteered or was chosen. Myths differ, and with his blood mingled into the clay, humanity gasped its first breath. The Igigi, freed from their drudgery, passed their toil to these new creatures, marking the moment the divine shifted their weight onto mortal shoulders. What makes this myth so haunting is its raw realism. The Igigi's revolt mirrors every labor uprising in history. From the pyramids to modern factories, workers pushed too far, demanding dignity. Enlil's response, not annihilation but innovation. He didn't crush the rebellion, he outsourced it, and here lies the Sumerians' bleak genius. They framed humanity's very existence as a divine labor-saving device. Every plowed field, every brick laid, every canal dug was, in mythic terms, the work we were literally made to do. Yet there's a twist buried in the clay. The god sacrificed to create us, Jeshtu-E, wasn't just any deity. His name means ear or understanding. Some scholars argue this implies humans inherited not just physical strength but divine intelligence. A silent rebellion woven into our bones. The Igigi may have won their freedom, but we, the replacements, were never meant to be mere drones. From the very beginning, the myth hints that humanity carries a spark of the god's own cunning, a potential to question, to resist. Perhaps that's why the Anunnaki later feared us, why flood myths arose, not because we failed in our purpose, but because we dared to exceed it. The legacy of this revolt echoes through time. Every time a worker demands fair wages, every time a civilization questions its rulers, the Ichig's torches flicker in the distance. And in the quiet moments when we wonder why life feels so heavy, the old Sumerian answer lingers because the gods designed it that way. But then again, they also gave us the wit to change it. High above the mortal world, in the opulent halls of the Jade Emperor's celestial court, divine order reigned unchallenged until a stone-born monkey with a grin too sharp for heaven's taste shattered the illusion of harmony. Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, wasn't just a rebel. He was chaos incarnate, a whirlwind of ambition and mischief who looked at the rigid hierarchy of the gods and asked, "Why not me?" His rebellion wasn't some petty squabble. It was a cosmic middle finger to an entire system built on titles and tradition. A system that had no idea what to do with a creature who could pluck immortality from the peaches of heaven and shatter constellations with his staff. The conflict began with an insult thinly disguised as an honor. When the Jade Emperor, hoping to tame the monkey's antics, granted him the title Keeper of the Heavenly Horses, it was celestial busywork, a meaningless role meant to pacify him. But Sun Wukong wasn't fooled. Discovering the truth, he stormed back to heaven, his golden staff whirling like a comet's tail, and declared himself the great sage equal to heaven. The audacity of it, to claim equality with the Jade Emperor himself, was unthinkable, a blasphemy that sent shockwaves through the heavenly bureaucracy. Yet beneath the bravado lay a pointed critique. Why should birthright determine power? Wukong, born of rock and nurtured by no one, had earned his strength through sheer will. The gods, with their inherited titles, hadn't. What followed was a war unlike any heaven had seen. The Monkey King didn't just fight, he performed. When the celestial army descended, he cloned himself into an army of duplicates, each grinning as they battered aside divine generals like gnats. Laozi, the great alchemist, trapped him in a furnace meant to refine him into submission, only for Wukong to emerge stronger, his eyes now blazing with the power to see through all deception. Even the Buddha's intervention, flattening him under a mountain for 5 centuries, felt less like a defeat and more like a timeout for a force too wild to destroy. But here's what makes this myth so enduring. Sun Wukong's rebellion wasn't just about strength, it was about identity. The Jade Emperor's heaven was a realm of rigid roles, gods as administrators, stars as clockwork, everything in its ordained place. Wukong, with his fluid transformations and contempt for titles, exposed the fragility of that order. His very existence asked, what if power wasn't given but taken? What if the rules were just suggestions? No wonder his story resonated far beyond China, inspiring everything from Dragon Ball to the Sandman. He's the archetype of the trickster who refuses to kneel, the underdog who proves systems can be cracked. Yet the tale's genius lies in its paradox. After his rebellion, Wukong doesn't topple heaven, he joins it, escorting the monk Xuanzang on his pilgrimage. The Monkey King trades anarchy for purpose, his chaos harnessed but never fully tamed. Even in service, he remains a thumb in the eye of tradition, a reminder that the most vibrant forces can't be controlled, only redirected. The Jade Emperor won the battle, but Wukong won the myth. Centuries later, we're still cheering for the monkey who looked at the gods and said, "Make me." Sun Wukong's rebellion didn't just rattle the heavens, it embodied the very essence of Taoist philosophy, where rigid structures crumble before the force of raw, untamed spontaneity. The Monkey King's journey mirrors the Taoist ideal of Wu Wei, the art of effortless action, where true power comes not from brute force but from aligning with the natural flow of the cosmos. When he shrugs off celestial titles and smashes through heavenly gates, he isn't just causing chaos, he's exposing the absurdity of a system that values rank over authenticity. Taoism celebrates the uncarved block, the primal simplicity before society imposes its rules. and Wukong, born from a stone untouched by mortal hands, is that uncarved block in motion. His defiance isn't rebellion for its own sake. It's a living critique of Confucian hierarchy, where even the gods cling to titles like lifelines. Immortality in Taoist tradition isn't just about living forever. It's about transcending the artificial boundaries that separate humans from the divine. Wukong's quest for eternal life begins with a daring theft. He devours the peaches of immortality, guzzles the elixir of life, and burns his name out of the book of death. These aren't just acts of theft, they're acts of reclamation. In Taoist alchemy, immortality is achieved by harmonizing the internal energies, and Wukong, in his refusal to accept mortality, embodies the alchemist's dream, transforming himself through sheer will and cunning. His later imprisonment under 5 Elements Mountain, even that becomes a metaphor for the Taoist journey, hardship as a crucible. The mountain doesn't break him, it refines him, forcing him to confront his own unrestrained nature before emerging tempered yet undiminished. The Monkey King's ultimate role as Xuanzang's protector reveals the deeper Taoist paradox. True freedom isn't the absence of responsibility, but the choice to embrace it without losing oneself. Wukong's golden headband, a gift-turned curse from Guanyin, symbolizes the tension between discipline and liberation. At first, it's a torment, tightening whenever he strays. But by journey's end, it's barely noticed, not because it's gone, but because Wukong has internalized its lesson. This mirrors the Taoist sage who follows the path without resisting it, not out of obedience but because the path and the self have become one. The rebellion never truly ends, it evolves. Even as a Buddha of victory, Wukong retains his mischievous grin, proof that immortality isn't about conforming to heaven's demands, but about remaking heaven in your own image. Western myths often frame rebellion as tragedy: Lucifer cast into hell, Prometheus bound to his rock, but Taoism offers a radical alternative: disruption as evolution. Wukong's chaos isn't punished, it's integrated, his energy harnessed but never domesticated. In a universe where the Tao flows like water, shaping itself to the container, yet always finding cracks to seep through, the Monkey King isn't an aberration. He's the embodiment of the way things ought to be, unscripted, unpredictable, and utterly alive. Every time he flips a heavenly palace upside down or outwits a smug immortal, he's not just breaking rules. He's revealing the truth beneath them, that even the cosmos thrives when its hierarchies are fluid, and that immortality isn't a reward for obedience, it's the birthright of those bold enough to reach for it. The first snow falls, and it does not melt. For 3 winters without summers, the world holds its breath as frost creeps across the land like a starving beast. Crops wither in the fields, lakes freeze solid, and animals perish in the unrelenting cold. This is Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter, the harbinger of Ragnarok, and it arrives not with a whisper but with the shriek of axes meeting shields. Norse myth paints this time not as mere climate disaster, but as an unraveling of civilization itself. Brothers turn on brothers for scraps of food, oaths shatter like ice underfoot, and the bonds of kinship fray until only desperation remains. But the cold is just the beginning. As hunger gnaws at the world, the gods sense what's coming. Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, bring whispers of unrest, wolves pacing at the edges of Midgard, their breath clouding the air as they await their hour. The giant wolf Fenrir, long bound by enchanted chains, strains against his fetters, his growls echoing through the roots of Yggdrasil. Even the sea, usually thundering against the shores, grows unnaturally still, as if Jormungandr, the world serpent, has coiled tighter in anticipation. This is no ordinary winter, it's the tightening of a noose, the slow suffocation of order before the final storm breaks loose. Yet the most chilling detail isn't the cold or the creeping monsters, it's the silence of the gods. Unlike other myths where deities scramble to avert disaster, the Norse pantheon meets Fimbulwinter with grim resignation. They know what comes next. Odin rides to the Well of Fate once more, seeking wisdom he already possesses. Thor grasps Mjolnir, but even his thunder feels muted. Freya, stripped of his sword, stares at the horizon where Surtur's flames will one day rise. Their inaction is deliberate, a recognition that some cycles cannot be broken. The Norns have woven the threads, and the tapestry must burn before it can be rewoven. What makes Fimbulwinter so haunting is how personal it feels. This isn't just a celestial event, it's a mirror held up to human frailty. When the Eddas describe men chewing on bark and feeding corpses to wolves, they're showing how quickly civility crumbles when survival is at stake. The Norse didn't fear winter, they revered its harsh lessons. But Fimbulwinter, that was winter without end, a trial meant to strip the world bare before the final reckoning. Even now, when blizzards howl outside our windows, it's hard not to wonder, is this just another storm or the first snowflake of something far older and darker? The answer, like the winter itself, lingers in the cold air, waiting. The air hangs heavy, scorched by years of unrelenting heat as the rivers run dry and the earth cracks beneath a merciless sky. This is the world under Vritra's reign, a colossal serpent coiled around the heavens themselves, his gargantuan body choking off the rains, his very presence leaching moisture from the land. In the Rigveda's oldest hymns, this isn't just a monster, he's the embodiment of Vritra, the obstruction, a cosmic dam holding back the waters of life. And the only force daring enough to challenge him, Indra, the thunder-wielding king of the gods, whose weapon isn't just a blade but the storm itself. Their battle shatters the very bones of the earth. Indra, fortified by Soma, the sacred intoxicant that fuels divine might, raises his Vajra, a lightning bolt forged by the artisan god Tivastar. This isn't just a weapon, it's the concentrated force of the sky's fury, crackling with enough energy to split mountains, and split them it does, with a strike that echoes across creation. Indra cleaves Vritra's scaly hide, smashing through the serpent's coils to reach the hidden reservoirs he's hoarded. The moment the blow lands, the heavens rupture. Torrents long imprisoned burst free, cascading down upon the parched earth like 1,000 liberated rivers. The Rigveda sings of this deluge with ecstatic reverence. As cows lowing to their calves, the waters rushed toward the sea, but the myth's brilliance lies in its layers. Vritra isn't just a simple villain, he's a paradox. Some hymns hint that he was once a sage, a being of wisdom twisted into greed, his hoarding of the waters less malice than obsession. Indra's act of slaying him isn't just victory, it's a necessary transgression, a violation of cosmic order to restore balance. The thunder god pays a price for this deed, haunted by guilt so profound he flees into hiding, leaving the world momentarily leaderless. Even the life-giving waters he releases carry a bitter truth. Creation often demands destruction first. This tension pulses through Hindu tradition. Later texts reimagine the battle as a metaphor for internal struggle, Vritra as ignorance constricting the mind, Indra's Vajra as the flash of enlightenment that shatters illusion. The released waters, the flood of wisdom that follows. Farmers in drought still whisper Indra's name when clouds gather, while yogis see the serpent's coils as the kundalini energy coiled at the spine's base, awaiting liberation. Every monsoon, when the first rains pound the dust into mud, the myth renews itself, chaos and order locked in a dance where neither can exist without the other. Yet the most striking legacy lies in the echoes beyond India. Compare Indra's Vajra to Thor's Mjolnir or Zeus's thunderbolt. The ancient Indo-Europeans carried this archetype of the storm god battling a serpent across continents. But only in the Rigveda does the serpent's death birth not just victory, but a world made fertile through struggle. The hymn's poetry lingers in the scent of wet soil after rain, a reminder that sometimes the heavens must be torn apart for life to begin again. The battlefield of Troy wasn't just a clash of mortal heroes, it was a divine chessboard where gods moved kings and pawns with equal abandon. Homer's Iliad reveals a secret truth. the Trojan War was never just about Helen's beauty or Menelaus's wounded pride. It was a Titanomachy, a war among gods where Olympus itself fractured into factions, each deity pulling strings from the shadows. Athena and Hera, seething at Paris's insult, backed the Greeks with tactical fury. Aphrodite, bound by her promise to the Trojan prince, shielded his city with reckless devotion. And Ares, the god of war, cared nothing for causes. He just craved the sweet, metallic tang of chaos. Watch Athena and Ares duel, and you'll see the Iliad's genius. She's discipline incarnate, her polished armor reflecting the cold calculations of a general. He's a whirlwind of bloodlust, his spear thrashing like a wild beast. When their weapons clash, it's more than combat, it's a debate about war itself. Athena doesn't just block Ares' strikes, she outthinks them, sidestepping his rage to land a stone-heavy blow that sends him crumpling to the dust. The battlefield falls silent for a breath as the god of war, humiliated, flees to Olympus, howling like a wounded dog. This isn't just victory, it's allegory. Homer shows us that brute force, unchecked by wisdom, will always lose to strategy. Then there's Hera's gambit, a seduction so audacious it rewrites the rules of divine intervention. Realizing Zeus's neutrality tilts the scales toward Troy, she doesn't plead or argue. She deploys the oldest weapon in mythology, desire, borrowing Aphrodite's enchanted girdle, the very one that sparked this war. She weaves a spell of irresistible allure. The scene is almost comedic. Zeus, ruler of the cosmos, reduced to a love-struck fool as Hera distracts him atop Mount Ida. The clouds themselves blush as their union shakes the earth, buying the Greeks precious time. But beneath the humor lies a razor-sharp truth. Even the king of gods isn't immune to manipulation, and passion can topple empires as surely as any army. What makes the Titanomachy so gripping is its rawness. These aren't aloof, perfect beings, they're gloriously flawed, their rivalries as petty as they are cosmic. Apollo and Poseidon, though technically on opposing sides, share a grudging respect as they level Trojan walls together. Artemis, ever the contrarian, snipes at Hera until reduced to tears by her own father's scorn. Every god reflects a facet of human nature, magnified to divine scale. When Athena coldly advises Diomedes to spear Aphrodite in the wrist, it's not just tactics, it's the venom of a grudge held since Paris called another goddess fairest. Homer's genius was in showing how these celestial feuds ripple downward. Ares' defeat emboldens Greek soldiers, Zeus's dalliance lets Hector rally the Trojans. The mortals think they're masters of their fates, but every arrow's path, every faltering step is tweaked by unseen hands. And perhaps that's the real tragedy of Troy, not that men die, but that they die for quarrels not their own, pawns in a game where the players never bleed, only bicker, then retire to feast on ambrosia while the smoke of burning cities drifts skyward like an offering they no longer deserve. The underworld smelled of rotten flowers and burning rubber, a stench so thick it clung to the back of the throat as Hunahpu and Expalanque descended the endless stairway into Xibalba. Their father, the great ball player Hunahpu, had walked these steps centuries before, only to have his head hung from a calabash tree as a trophy for the death gods. Now the twins carried more than vengeance in their hearts, they carried a strategy. The lords of Xibalba craved humiliation, so the brothers would give them spectacle, a performance so dazzling the gods of decay would forget to watch their backs. Xibalba wasn't just an underworld, it was a labyrinth of lethal theater. Every challenge was rigged, the razor house where blades sprang from the walls, the cold house where shattering ice stole breath from lungs, the jaguar house where shadows moved with teeth. But the twins anticipated each trap, turning the lord's love of cruelty against them. When given torches and cigars to keep overnight, they glued fireflies to the tips, mimicking flame without burning. They sent a mosquito to eavesdrop on the death gods' names, then greeted each by title, shattering the illusion of anonymity that empowered them. The ball game was their masterstroke. Zebalba's lords demanded a match, expecting to reenact their victory over the twins' father. But Hunahpu and Exbalanque played differently. They let their opponents score first, luring them into complacency before striking back with impossible shots, balls that curved midair, volleys that shattered stone markers. When the lords demanded they retrieve the balls from a pit of spikes, the twins summoned hummingbirds to carry them back. Each move was a feint, disguising their true aim: to die. Yes, die, because the final trick required surrender. Allowing themselves to be sacrificed and ground into bone meal, the twins whispered spells as their remains were cast into the river, only to resurrect as glorious fishmen, then shape-shifting performers who could set themselves aflame and emerge unscathed. The death gods, giddy with curiosity, demanded a demonstration. "Cut our throats," urged Exbalanque, "and watch us return to life." Blinded by spectacle, the lords complied, only to realize too late that the twins had no intention of resurrecting them. With the rulers of Zebalba broken, the brothers reclaimed their father's skull, planting it in the earth where it sprouted as the first gourd tree, a symbol of life emerging from defeat. Their victory wasn't just personal, it rewrote the rules of mortality itself. The Maya saw in their story a promise that cleverness could outwit even death, that games weren't just contests but cosmologies in motion. Even today, when a highland shaman tosses a ball of copal resin into sacred flames, they rekindle the twins' greatest lesson, that sometimes to defeat darkness you must first let it think it's won. The dance of Hunahpu and Exbalanque through Zebalba wasn't just mythic theater, it was written in the stars. For the Maya, this underworld battle didn't exist in isolation. It pulsed in sync with the celestial rhythms of Venus, the dazzling star they called Chak-Ek, the Great Red Weaver. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving pre-Columbian Maya books, reveals the astonishing precision with which they tracked Venus's cycles, weaving them into the very fabric of their cosmology. Every disappearance of Venus as the morning star signaled a descent into the underworld, a cosmic echo of the hero twins' journey, and when it re-emerged as the evening star. That was their triumphant resurrection, mirrored in the skies for all to witness. What's chilling is how meticulously the Maya mapped these cycles. Venus completes a full circuit every 584 days, alternating between morning and evening appearances with periods of invisibility. The Dresden Codex dedicates pages to tracking these phases, correlating them with omens of war, fertility, and most crucially, the movements of gods. The period when Venus vanishes behind the sun was considered especially perilous, a time when the boundaries between Zebalba and the mortal realm grew thin. Priests would pore over the codex, anticipating these transitions to perform rituals shielding their people from the chaos seeping through the cracks. The twins' victory over the death gods wasn't just a story, it was a celestial playbook for survival, but the connections run deeper. The Maya synced Venus's cycles with their sacred calendar, the Tzolk'in, a 260-day web of days and numbers humming with divine significance. Every 52 years, when the Tzolk'in and solar calendar aligned, they braced for upheaval, fearing the underworld might erupt into their world unless balanced by sacrifice and ball games. The Popol Vuh even hints that the twins' ball game against the Zebalba lords was timed to Venus's descent, turning myth into an act of celestial engineering. Modern archaeologists have found ball courts oriented to track Venus's path, their stone markers casting shadows that slithered like serpents as the planet moved, a physical manifestation of the sky's role in the underworld duel. This astronomical link reveals the Maya's genius. They didn't just observe the cosmos, they participated in it. When a king reenacted the twins' victory in a ritual ball game, he wasn't merely commemorating a legend. He was channeling Venus's power, aligning his reign with the stars' timeless battles. The Dresden Codex's Venus tables weren't cold calculations. They were survival guides, teaching rulers when to wage war, favored during Venus's first appearance as the morning star, or when to negotiate as it faded into evening light. Even the twins' resurrection as fishmen finds its echo in the Codex, where Venus's re-emergence from solar conjunction is depicted as a watery rebirth, its light breaking the surface like a diver returning from the depths. To the Maya, the hero twin story wasn't confined to the past. It unfolded nightly overhead, a drama written in celestial ink. Their myths weren't just tales, they were equations precise as the gears of a clockwork universe where gods, stars, and mortals moved in lockstep. When we decipher the Dresden Codex today, we're not just reading an ancient text, we're eavesdropping on a conversation between earth and sky, where every Venus cycle whispers, "Remember the twins." Their victory wasn't an ending, but a rhythm as eternal as the stars themselves. Before light, before land, before even the concept of time, there was only chaos, a formless swirling mass of yin and yang fused together in perfect, motionless balance. Then came a single, deafening crack. Pangu, the primordial giant, erupted from this cosmic egg, his horns scraping the heavens while his feet anchored the depths. For 18,000 years, a span so vast it defies mortal comprehension, he stood like a living pillar between the newly parted sky and earth, arms straining to push them further apart with each passing century. His breath became the wind, his sweat the rain, his groans the rolling thunder of a world taking shape. This wasn't creation by divine decree, but creation through sheer exhaustion, a struggle so monumental it rewrote the rules of existence itself. Pangu's labor was far from a tidy act of separation. Yin, the dense, heavy essence, sank like molten iron beneath him, hardening into mountains and continents. Yang, the luminous, rising force, leapt upward in streams of fire and light, crystallizing into stars and the vault of the heavens, but these forces resisted division. Legends say the sky would collapse each night, forcing Pangu to rise again at dawn to heave it back into place. His bones became ridges of stone, his veins the twisting rivers, his flesh the fertile soil that would one day birth forests and fields. Even his parasites transformed fleas in his fur carried off by the wind to become the ancestors of all humanity. This was no gentle genesis, it was creation through annihilation, the birth of the cosmos from the body of its first casualty. What makes Pangu's sacrifice so startling is its inversion of other creation myths. Unlike the Babylonian Tiamat or Norse Ymir, whose deaths were violent acts inflicted by younger gods, Pangu's dissolution was voluntary, a willing unraveling of self into world. When his strength finally waned, he didn't fall. He melted like wax, his left eye becoming the sun, his right the moon. His final breath scattered as clouds, his voice lingering in the echoes of caves. Later Taoist texts would reframe this moment as the ultimate act of wu-wei, effortless action where Pangu's surrender, not his struggle, allowed the universe to flourish. Traces of Pangu linger in Chinese cosmology long after his passing. The reverence for mountains as sacred pillars reflects his enduring posture, holding earth and sky apart. Festivals in his honor once involved reenacting his separation of yin and yang through dances with towering bamboo poles, swaying like the giant's final breaths. Even the Taiji symbol, the swirling black and white teardrops of yin and yang, holds silent tribute to his labor, perfect balance emerging from chaos, but only after unimaginable exertion. Yet Pangu's legacy isn't just in grand symbolism. Farmers tending terraced rice paddies, their backs bent like the primordial giants, embody his perseverance. The way steam rises from morning broth, splitting into mist and droplets, reenacts his first divisions. Modern astronomers mapping the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang, might not realize they're chasing echoes of an 18,000-year heartbeat. Pangu's truth transcends myth. Creation isn't a single event, but a continuous unfolding where every cracked boulder and gust of wind whispers, "I was once part of something vaster." The universe, after all, is still stretching, perhaps because somewhere in the dark, Pangu's fingers still press against the sky. The clash that shook the heavens wasn't fought with swords or spears, but with the weight of betrayal itself. In the book of Revelation, the archangel Michael leads the loyal angels against a rebellion so catastrophic it tears paradise apart. Lucifer, the light bringer turned adversary, and his followers hurled from the celestial heights like falling stars. John's apocalyptic vision describes it with cosmic grandeur. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. This isn't just divine justice, it's the moment the universe fractures into a battleground between light and shadow, a schism that would echo through Christian theology for millennia. But the roots of this celestial revolt dig deeper than the New Testament. Centuries before Revelation was penned, Canaanite myth spoke of Baal's triumph over Yam, the chaos dragon, and Mot, the god of death, stories where order battles primordial disorder. Even Isaiah's taunt against the king of Babylon, "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn," borrows imagery from a pre-Israelite myth about a star god's failed coup. The war in heaven isn't a standalone event. It's a mosaic of ancient Near Eastern conflicts, reframed through a monotheistic lens. Where pagan gods fought for dominion, Revelation's conflict centers on obedience, framing rebellion as the ultimate sin against divine authority. What makes this myth so pivotal is its psychological weight. Unlike the Norse or Greek pantheons, where gods feud over power or pride, Satan's fall hinges on a singular vice: hubris. Medieval theologians like Augustine expanded this into a cornerstone of Christian thought, the idea that evil isn't a force unto itself, but a corruption of good, a perversion of free will. Dante's Inferno immortalized Lucifer's fall as a plummet from grace so violent it carved hell's abyss, his wings beating futilely against the icy winds of Cocytus. Milton's Paradise Lost went further, painting Satan as a tragic antihero whose defiance, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, reveals the seductive danger of pride. Yet there's a haunting ambiguity in the original text. Revelation's dragon isn't just Satan, it's that ancient serpent, a deliberate callback to Eden's tempter, weaving the cosmic and the earthly into a single, sprawling narrative of rebellion and ruin. The early church fathers saw this as a cosmic retelling of humanity's fall, the war above mirroring the struggle below, each betrayal amplifying the other. Modern scholars trace another layer: political subtext. Written during Roman persecution, Revelation's war allegorizes resistance to imperial tyranny, with Satan's rebellion mirroring the empire's oppression. The dragon's 7 heads, crowned and blasphemous, would have been unmistakable symbols for first-century readers, a coded critique of Caesar's claim to divinity. The war in heaven isn't just theology, it's protest literature, a celestial revolt validating earthly defiance. From art to pop culture, the imagery endures. Renaissance frescoes show angels clad in gold, their spears piercing demonic shadows. Heavy metal albums and video games recast the conflict as Gothic spectacle. Even secular narratives of underdog rebellions owe a debt to this archetype, whether it's Star Wars' fallen angel Anakin or his Dark Materials' dissident angels. The war in heaven isn't confined to scripture, it's a template for wrestling with power, rebellion, and the cost of defiance. Every time we imagine a cosmic struggle between light and darkness, we're retracing the footsteps of those rebel angels, and the archangel who still stands between them and the throne. Deep in the tangled roots of Norse mythology, far from the thunder of Thor's hammer or the scheming of Odin's ravens, lies a whisper of an alliance so unexpected it redefines how we see the gods. The Aesir, those warlike deities of Asgard, once stood shoulder to shoulder with the Eldjolfar, the luminous light elves, against a menace so vast even the sagas hesitate to name it. Fragmentary verses in the Poetic Edda and cryptic inscriptions on runestones hint at this union, painting a picture of gods and elves setting aside ancient grudges when the cosmos itself hung in the balance. This wasn't just a temporary truce, it was a fusion of two alien worldviews. The Aesir, gods of blood and mead halls, embodied raw, chaotic power. The Eljo-Zolfar, by contrast, were beings of refined magic, artisans who shaped light like clay, their realms shimmering with beauty too delicate for mortal eyes. Yet when the threat emerged, some scholars speculate a primordial void spawn like Nidhogg's kin, others a rebellion of forgotten Jotnar. Their strengths became complementary. Picture it, Odin's strategic ruthlessness paired with the elves' uncanny foresight, Thor's brute force amplified by their enchantments. Together, they didn't just fight, they wove a new kind of warfare, where every lightning strike carried the precision of elven craft, and every spell thrummed with the Allfather's cunning. The aftermath of this battle rippled through the 9 worlds. The elves, once aloof figures lingering at myth's edges, gained a grudging respect in Asgard's halls. Scattered references in Gylfaginning suggest Freyr, the Vanir god of fertility, later fostered closer ties with Alfheim, perhaps building on this fragile trust. Even the architecture of Asgard might bear their influence. Some argue the shimmering walls of Valhalla, repaired after the war, carry the faintest elven glyphs if one knows where to look. Yet the most haunting detail is the alliance's silence. Unlike Ragnarök, foretold in screaming detail, this conflict survives only in half-erased runes and skaldic verses deliberately stripped of names. Why? Maybe the threat was too terrible to name, its memory buried like a weapon too dangerous to wield. Or perhaps in a culture that prized heroic doom, cooperation was the harder story to tell, less thrilling than feuds but far more revolutionary. Either way, this ghost of a myth reminds us that even in the Norse cosmos, where fate was written in stone, sometimes the bravest act wasn't dying gloriously but standing together. The winds howling down from the mountains carried more than snow. They carried the growls of Kim-Unkami, the bear spirit, as he paced the ridges between two warring worlds. In Ainu mythology, the Kamui Wars weren't merely clashes of supernatural forces. They were the violent negotiations between mountain and sea, a cosmic struggle over who would dictate the rhythm of life on the land. The mountain Kami, like the owl-shaped cotton core Kami, commanded the forests and hunting grounds, while the sea Kami, such as the Orca Ripun Kami, ruled the tides and the bounty of the deep. When their battles erupted, storms would shatter coastlines, landslides would bury villages, and the Ainu people caught between these titanic wills could only watch as the natural order unraveled around them. Enter the bear, the great mediator. Kim-Unkami wasn't just another spirit, he was a bridge between realms, equally at home in the high crags and the river valleys where salmon surged inland from the sea. The Ainu saw in the bear's dual nature a creature of both earth and water, predator and sacred guest, a force capable of tempering the conflict. During the Kamui Wars, it was often the bear who brokered fragile truces, his presence a reminder that the mountains needed the sea's fish to nourish the soil, and the sea relied on the mountain's rivers to feed its currents. Rituals like the Ayamonte, the ceremonial sending of the bear's spirit back to the heavens, weren't just acts of gratitude, they were diplomatic overtures soothing the frayed tempers of the Kami by honoring their interconnectedness. The wars themselves played out in nature's most violent displays. When Ripun Kami grew furious, he would hurl waves like spears against the cliffs, flooding the rivers until they choked with salt. Cotton Core Kami retaliated by summoning avalanches that roared into the ocean, his winged servants the Blackistan's fish owls screeching warnings through the night. Yet neither could claim absolute victory. The Ainu understood these battles as cyclical, necessary even destruction clearing the way for renewal, much like the bear's hibernation and rebirth. A village spared by a landslide might find its soil richer the next spring. A coastline battered by storms would later yield unexpected treasures in the tide pools. What's striking is how the Ainu world-view refused to villainize either side. Unlike the clear-cut moral dichotomies of many mythologies, the Kamui Wars acknowledged that conflict itself could be sacred, a dynamic tension that sustained balance rather than disrupted it. The bear's role wasn't to end the wars permanently, but to ensure they didn't spiral into annihilation. Modern Ainu embroidery still depicts these battles in swirling patterns of indigo and white, the threads intertwining like mountain streams meeting the sea, a visual prayer for harmony amid inevitable strife. And perhaps that's the most profound lesson of these myths. The Kamui Wars didn't demand a victor, they demanded respect for the forces that shape our world. When Ainu hunters offered prayers before taking a bear or fishermen cast tokens into the waves, they weren't just appeasing spirits. They were participating in an ancient covenant, one that recognized fury and peace as two breaths of the same inseparable life. Even today, when storm clouds gather over Hokkaido's peaks or the sea froths with unrest, the echoes of those battles linger, not as a warning, but as a reminder that balance is never passive. It's a pact written in wind, water, and the footsteps of bears. Zeus's throne wasn't as unshakable as it seemed, especially when three of the most powerful Olympians secretly gathered to challenge his reign. Hera, Poseidon, and Athena, each nursing their own grievances, formed an alliance that nearly toppled the king of the gods. Hera's resentment burned the hottest after centuries of enduring Zeus's infidelities and watching as he disregarded her status as queen. Her patience had worn thin. Poseidon, who'd once ruled the cosmos alongside his brothers, chafed at Zeus's unilateral decrees, while Athena, wisdom incarnate, saw her father's capricious whims as a threat to divine order itself. This wasn't just mutiny, it was a carefully orchestrated coup. The conspiracy unfolded in hushed tones on the slopes of Olympus. Hera, ever the strategist, wove enchanted bonds strong enough to restrain even a god. Golden chains forged in the depths of Hephaestus's workshop, their links spelled to tighten with every struggle. When Zeus lay in a rare, deep slumber, they struck. Poseidon summoned waves of celestial energy to pin his brother's limbs, while Athena placed the chains with surgical precision. For one fleeting moment, the coup seemed successful. Zeus awoke to find himself immobilized, his thunderbolt just out of reach. The pantheon held its breath, waiting to see if the old order would crumble. But Zeus had one weapon they hadn't accounted for: Briareos, the 100-handed hecatoncheir, loyal from the Titanomachy. With a speed that defied his monstrous form, Briareos rushed to Zeus's side, his countless fingers working in unison to snap the chains like thread. The rebellion collapsed in an instant. Poseidon, ever the pragmatist, bowed first. Athena, realizing the futility of further resistance, offered a tactical retreat. Hera, however, refused to yield and bore the brunt of Zeus's wrath. Her punishment was as poetic as it was brutal. Zeus hung her from the vault of heaven by those same golden chains, anvils tied to her ankles to weigh her down. There she dangled, a spectacle for gods and mortals alike, the once proud queen reduced to a cautionary tale. Yet even in humiliation, Hera's defiance simmered. The other Olympians wept at her suffering until even Zeus relented, freeing her only after she swore an unbreakable oath never to challenge him again. This failed revolt exposed the fragile balance of Olympus. Zeus's rule wasn't secured by love or loyalty, but by the constant threat of superior force. The incident also revealed an uncomfortable truth. The gods were as prone to pettiness, ambition, and flawed judgment as the mortals they presided over. Hera's golden chains didn't just restrain her, they bound the entire pantheon in a silent understanding. Rebellion might be possible, but victory that remained stubbornly out of reach. The plains of Shinar hummed with the ambition of a species no longer content to merely survive. After the Great Flood receded, humanity had found common purpose, not just in rebuilding, but in reaching. Their tower wasn't just brick and mortar, it was a declaration, a stairway to divinity itself, its peak aimed at the heavens like an arrow nocked against the bow of the sky. What terrified the divine council in Genesis wasn't the structure's height, but what it represented: a unified humanity speaking one language, bound by one goal, capable of anything they dared imagine. That kind of collective power, unchecked, threatened to blur the line between creator and creation. So God intervened not with fire or flood this time, but with something far more insidious. He didn't topple the tower, he shattered their shared understanding, scrambling their speech into a cacophony of gibberish. Builders shouted orders no one could follow. Architects sketched plans that looked like nonsense to their teams. The project collapsed not from structural failure, but from the inability to even argue over why it failed. What seemed like divine punishment was really a cosmic reset, a forced diversification of human potential. But there's a paradox buried in this myth. The same text that frames Babel as a curse also hints it was necessary. Earlier in Genesis, God worries aloud. If they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. That's not the voice of a petty tyrant. It's the uneasy tone of a parent realizing their child has outgrown training wheels. The tower wasn't just a challenge to divine authority. It was humanity's first attempt to bypass their role as stewards and seize the reins of destiny. By scattering them, God didn't just protect his supremacy, he gave humans the one thing that fuels innovation and art: limitation. The parallels to older myths are striking. Compare Babel to the Greek Titanomachy, where Zeus fractures the Titans' unity to prevent their return, or the Anu-Kamui Wars, where bear spirits mediate between clashing forces to prevent total domination. Even the Norse Aesir-Vanir truce sealed with spit reflects this theme, that unchecked unity can be as dangerous as chaos. The Bible's genius was framing this cosmic battle linguistically. Where other gods wielded thunderbolts or floods, Yahweh weaponized communication itself, turning humanity's greatest strength, cooperation, into the wedge that drove them apart. Yet the story refuses simplistic morality. Later Jewish midrashim suggest the tower's builders weren't just arrogant. Some were genuinely afraid of another flood, constructing a refuge to defy divine caprice. Others claim their bricks were more precious than human life workers toiled to death, their bodies bricked into the walls. These interpretations paint Babel not as pure rebellion, but as a cautionary tale about sacrificing humanity for ambition, a warning that echoes in every skyscraper that shadows its laborers. And that's why Babel's legacy endures. It's not just a myth about language, it's about the double-edged sword of collective power. Every failed utopia, every fractured movement, every technology that connects us while isolating us, they're all inheritors of that moment when humanity's single voice splintered into 1,000 tongues. The irony, in scattering us, God might have given us our greatest gift, the necessity to bridge divides, to strive for understanding across chasms of difference. The tower fell, but the struggle to rebuild it in spirit, if not in brick, is what makes us human. The air over Mag-Tuaid thickened with the stench of rotting earth and iron as the Tuatha Dé Danann faced their darkest hour. Balor of the Poisonous Eye, king of the Fomorians, loomed over the battlefield like a walking curse, his single lidless eye veined with pulsing poison, capable of withering entire battalions with a single glance. The myths say it took 4 men just to lift that monstrous eyelid when he prepared to unleash its devastation. But Lug Lamfodda, the radiant young god of many skills, didn't flinch. He'd been preparing for this moment since childhood, when his grandfather Balor, yes, the same Balor, tried to drown him in a desperate bid to thwart prophecy. This wasn't just a battle of strength, it was a duel of wits and cosmic irony. Lug, the grandson fated to kill Balor, now stood opposite him on the field, armed with nothing but a sling and a single smooth stone. The tension was unbearable. Balor's eye began to creak open, its venomous glow searing the air, but Lug moved faster. With a flick of his wrist, he loosed the stone, not at the eye itself, but at the back of Balor's skull. The projectile punched clean through, carrying the venomous orb backward like a grotesque cork, its poison now cascading over the Fomorian ranks instead of the Tuatha Dé. Balor's own weapon turned against him, his death scream echoing across the land as his troops fled in terror. The symbolism here is razor-sharp. Lug, whose name means Shining One, defeats darkness not by brute force but by redirecting its own power, light outmaneuvering shadow at its own game. His sling wasn't just a weapon, it was a tool of inversion, turning the Fomorians' greatest asset into their downfall. This moment crystallizes a recurring theme in Celtic myth: victory through cleverness, not just courage. Compare this to the Dagda using his club both as a weapon and a plow earlier in the battle, or Nuada's silver prosthetic arm. Technology and ingenuity prized alongside raw might. Archaeology lends eerie credence to this myth. Near the supposed site of Mag Tuaid in County Sligo, excavations uncovered sling stones by the hundreds, some still bearing the heat cracks from being baked for added hardness. These weren't pebbles picked up at random. They were standardized, engineered projectiles, evidence of a people who understood the power of precision. Lug's legendary shot may be mythic exaggeration, but it's rooted in very real Celtic reverence for the sling as both a hunter's tool and a symbol of divine favor. Even the stone's trajectory matters by striking from the front but exiting through the back. It mimics the Celtic belief in circular time, where endings fold into beginnings. What's often overlooked is Balor's tragic dimension. In some versions, he's not just a mindless monster but a figure bound by his own prophecy, desperate to evade a doom set in motion the moment he heard the prediction. His attempt to kill baby Lug by drowning him parallels countless Indo-European myths of exposed heroes Perseus, Moses, Romulus, yet here, the cycle completes with chilling inevitability. The Fomorians themselves aren't pure evil. They represent wild, untamed forces, necessary antagonists, but also, in some tales, teachers. After their defeat, Brez the Fomorian is spared in exchange for revealing agricultural secrets, proving even enemies hold wisdom worth preserving. Modern Ireland still whispers this battle's legacy. At the annual Lugnasad festival, reenactments of Lug's triumph blend harvest rituals with mock combat. The slings whoosh through the air, a sonic echo of that fateful shot. In a way, every Irish storyteller who recounts Lug's victory reenacts his skill hitting the mark not with force alone, but with perfect poetic timing. The lesson lingers. Sometimes the most powerful strikes aren't the heaviest, but the ones that turn the enemy's strength against them, leaving both history and myth forever altered in their wake. The heavens trembled as Anu, king of the gods, fled from Cumabai's wrath, but escape came too late. In a desperate grapple at the edge of the cosmos, Cumabai, the grain god turned usurper, did the unthinkable. He tore into Anu's body with his teeth, severing the god's genitals and swallowing them whole. This wasn't just mutilation, it was a grotesque act of cosmic theft. By consuming Anu's divine essence, Cumabai inherited the storm god's power, only to discover that victory came with terrible consequences. The seed within him quickened, growing into not one but three deities: Teshub, the storm god, Tashmishu, his fierce attendant, and the Tigris River, bursting forth from Cumabai's side like a second birth. The Hurrian myths from ancient Anatolia pull no punches. This was divinity born from violence, a lineage forged in betrayal and bodily horror. Yet Cumabai's ambition couldn't be quenched by mere unintended parenthood. When Teshub eventually rose to challenge him, the dethroned god devised a plan so cunning it bent the laws of nature. He coupled with a mountain, quite literally, lying with the towering stone goddess Urukata to conceive Ulikami, a being of living diorite. This wasn't just a monster, it was an abomination designed to be untouchable. Cumabai hid his son's growth by placing him atop the shoulders of Apeluri, the giant who held the earth and sky apart. Sound familiar? Atlas fans take note. There, bathed in the primordial waters of the underworld, Ulikami grew rapidly, his stone body immune to the weapons of gods. By the time he breached the surface, his head scraped the stars, his limbs cast shadows over entire kingdoms, and his very presence silenced the thunder in Teshub's hands. The battle that followed rewrote the rules of divine combat. Teshub's storms shattered harmlessly against Alakami's granite skin. Even Ishtar's famed seduction failed. The monster, deaf and blind to all but his father's will, couldn't be charmed. Desperate, the gods turned to Ea, the god of wisdom, who remembered the ancient tools used to separate heaven and earth at the dawn of time. Retrieving the copper Kupasa cutter from the ruins of the old world, Ea sliced Alakami from Apellari's shoulders, severing his connection to the primordial waters. Only then, weakened and unbalanced, could Teshub strike the killing blow. What makes this cycle so mesmerizing is its layered symbolism. Kumabai's castration of Anu mirrors agricultural cycles, the cutting of the old to nourish the new, while Alakami embodies humanity's primal fear of the indestructible, drought, famine, the mountain that cannot be moved. Yet there's also dark humor here. Kumabai, the would-be king, is undone by the same act that granted him power. His swallowed children become his downfall, much like Cronus in Greek myth. The Hurrians understood that tyranny inevitably breeds its own destruction, often in ways the tyrant never anticipates. Archaeologists have found fragments of this myth etched into Hittite tablets, proof of its spread across Bronze Age empires. The tale's endurance might stem from its raw practicality. Even gods must rely on forgotten wisdom, ease cutter, and teamwork to overcome seemingly invincible foes. Modern readers might see parallels in everything from climate crises to political upheaval forces that seem unstoppable until someone remembers an old solution, buried but not lost. The Kumabai cycle doesn't offer tidy endings. It offers survival, hard-won and messy, with the scars to prove it. The mist curled around the peak of Mount Tibik like a living thing, thick enough to hide the god who descended through its folds, Hwanung, son of the heavenly emperor Hwanan, stepping onto earth with a purpose that would shape a kingdom. His arrival wasn't a quiet blessing, it was a divine intervention, a mission to lift humanity from the chaos of hunger, disease, and the relentless torment of evil spirits. The myths say he brought with him 3 heavenly seals, symbols of sovereignty, agriculture, and justice, and 3,000 loyal subjects, a celestial entourage to wage war against the darkness choking the land. But this was no mere conquest. Hwanung's battle wasn't fought with swords alone. When the Yokwi, shape-shifting spirits of pestilence, poisoned rivers and twisted crops into rotting husks, he countered with more than force. He taught the people to brew medicinal herbs, to purify water with fire and sacred rites, to build walls not just of stone but of communal trust. The Unnayo, a bare-turned woman who sought his wisdom, became a testament to his transformative power. Through patience, discipline, and raw endurance, she transcended her animal nature, embodying the potential Hwanung saw in all humanity. Yet the greatest test came when the spirits of wind and rain, furious at his intrusion, unleashed storms to drown his fledgling city of Shinsi. Hwanung didn't retaliate with equal fury. Instead, he climbed to the highest altar and played the jade flute of heaven, its notes piercing the tempest like a needle threading calm through chaos. The winds stilled, not out of submission, but recognition. Here was a ruler who understood balance, who could temper divine authority with empathy. The culmination of this cosmic struggle wasn't just a kingdom secured, but a legacy born. When Dangun, Hwanung's son with Unnayo, founded Gojosian in 2333 BC, he didn't just inherit a throne. He inherited a covenant between heaven and earth, a promise that civilization wasn't imposed from above but cultivated through partnership. The myths whisper that the spirits Hwanung battled weren't eradicated, they were integrated. Their wild energies harnessed into rituals that honored both their power and their place in the natural order. To this day, the Dangun festival reverberates with these echoes. Dancers clad in bearskins reenact Unnayo's transformation, while shamans chant to the very spirits Hwanung once subdued. The story isn't just a foundation myth, It's a blueprint for Korean identity where harmony isn't the absence of conflict, but the hard-won equilibrium between opposing forces. Every time a modern Korean village placates a restless spirit with offerings or seeks balance in the face of upheaval, they're walking the path Hwanung carved into the mountainside where heaven and earth once touched, and a god dared to believe humanity could rise to meet him. The skies above the Vedic world trembled not with thunder, but with dissent, a tempest of youthful fury as the Maruts, the wild storm troopers, turned their lances against their own king. Indra, slayer of Vritra and wielder of the Vajra, found himself facing mutiny from the very forces meant to serve him. These weren't mere rebels, they were his brothers, born from the womb of the sky goddess Prisni, their bronze armor gleaming like lightning, their voices the roar of gales. The Rigveda captures the tension in haunting verses. They who once shared his feasts now sharpen their spears, demanding a throne drenched in equal glory. This wasn't just a power struggle, it was a revolt against hierarchy itself. A challenge to the idea that cosmic order required a single, unchallenged ruler. What sparked their defiance? The hymn's whisper of ambition, yes, but also of neglect. The Maruts, though fierce, were relegated to the background of Indra's triumphs, their contributions overshadowed by his solo feats. When they demanded recognition, a share in the Soma offerings, a voice in celestial councils, Indra responded with silence. So they forged their own path, rallying under the banner of Rudra, the howling storm god whose unpredictability mirrored their own. Their rebellion wasn't chaotic, it was meticulously coordinated. Each Marut moved in synchronized fury, their spears carving whirlwinds that uprooted forests, their battle cries shaking the pillars of heaven. Indra's response reveals the complexity of Vedic leadership. He didn't crush them outright. Instead, he met their challenge with a mix of force and diplomacy, engaging them in a cosmic game of brinkmanship. In one hymn, Indra hurls his Vajra, not to strike them down but to split a mountain, releasing trapped waters that quench the land's thirst. The act is both a display of power and a lesson. His strength sustains even those who defy him. The Maruts, stunned by the generosity woven into his might, begin to waver. The resolution comes through shared purpose. When the demon Namusai threatens both gods and mortals with a drought so severe it cracks the earth, Indra does the unthinkable. He calls the Maruts to his side. Together, they devise a plan as cunning as it is brutal. Knowing Namusai's magic shields him from weapons forged of day or night, they wait for twilight, that liminal hour where neither reigns. Then, with Indra's Vajra and the Maruts' combined gales, they shred the demon's essence into foam, releasing the stolen reins. Victory, when it comes, belongs to all. This hard-won alliance reshapes the Vedic cosmos. The Maruts, once rebels, become Indra's most loyal companions, their storms no longer weapons of dissent but tools of divine justice. Yet the hymns never let us forget their edge. Even in later texts when they ride alongside Indra, there's a flicker of their old defiance, a reminder that loyalty, in their case, was earned, not given. Their story isn't just about submission, it's about reciprocity. The Rigveda honors them with titles like the Singers of Truth and the Unbridled Ones who choose their chains. Modern echoes of this conflict linger wherever authority is tested, whether in the clamor of labor movements or the murmurs of dissent within rigid systems. The Maruts teach us that even the fiercest hierarchies must bend to recognize the worth of their parts, lest the storms they unleash consume their own foundations. And when the monsoon winds howl across the Indian subcontinent, some still say it's the Maruts laughing, not as subjects but as partners, their rebellion forever etched into the rhythm of the skies. The Nile's waters ran black the night Set murdered Osiris, not with a blade, but with deception's sharpest edge. Inviting his brother to a feast under the pretense of reconciliation, Set revealed his true weapon, a sarcophagus crafted to Osiris's exact measurements. When the unsuspecting god-king lay inside, Set's followers slammed the lid shut and hurled it into the Nile, where the current carried it far from Egypt's ordered fields into the realm of chaos. This wasn't just fratricide, it was an act of cosmic vandalism. Osiris embodied Mat, the delicate balance of truth, justice, and fertile cycles, while Set represented Isfet, the ever-lurking disorder that craved to unravel creation itself. The aftermath unfolded like a slow-moving catastrophe. Without Osiris, the Nile's floods grew erratic, crops withered, and the desert sands crept closer to Memphis' gates. But Isis, Osiris's wife and sister, refused to let chaos claim victory. Her search for the scattered pieces of her husband's body, 13 parts flung across Egypt by Set, became a mythic scavenger hunt that redefined resurrection. Each recovered fragment, all but the phallus, swallowed by a Nile fish, was consecrated in the soil, transforming burial sites into pockets of order resisting entropy. When she reassembled him long enough to conceive Horus, the stage was set for the ultimate divine rematch, one that would last 80 years and redefine Egyptian cosmology. Horus's war against Set wasn't just personal vengeance, it was the universe recalibrating itself. Their battles tore through the fabric of reality. Storms raged when Set gouged out Horus's left eye, the moon. Droughts spread when Horus castrated Set, symbolizing the desert's sterility. The Aeneid, Egypt's divine council, became a celestial courtroom where the gods debated not just who should rule, but what kind of power should govern existence. Set's argument was brutally pragmatic. He claimed dominance through strength, citing his role as Ra's defender against the serpent Apep. Horus countered with lineage and legitimacy, his restored eye proof that broken things could be made whole again. What makes this conflict so revolutionary is its lack of absolute resolution. After centuries of battles, legal disputes, and magical duels, the gods declared Horus king, but Set wasn't annihilated or imprisoned. He was given dominion over storms and foreign lands, forces Egypt needed even as they feared them. This compromise acknowledged a profound truth: chaos couldn't be eradicated, only contained and redirected. The pharaohs who bore Horus's name on their crowns still honored Set during military campaigns, recognizing that even Mat required controlled chaos to push back against stagnation. Modern excavations reveal how deeply this duality shaped Egyptian thought. At the Temple of Horus at Edfu, inscriptions detail their battles as elaborate rituals where priests reenacted the divine struggle to renew cosmic order. Meanwhile, Set's cult flourished in the frontier city of Avaris, his worshippers invoking his raw power to protect trade routes. The Osiris myth wasn't just a story, it was a theological framework that allowed Egypt to conceptualize everything from Nile floods to foreign invasions as part of an eternal, necessary tension. When farmers cast effigies of Set into the river during droughts, they weren't rejecting chaos. They were pleading for it to retreat just enough for life to continue. Perhaps that's the true lesson of this 80-year war. The conflict between Horus and Set mirrors our own struggles, not between good and evil, but between stability and change, tradition and innovation. Every civilization, every life exists in that fragile space where order and chaos collide. The Egyptians didn't pray for Set's destruction. They prayed for his temperance, knowing the desert wind that eroded monuments also carried the seeds of renewal. In honoring both gods, they acknowledged a truth we still grapple with today. That balance isn't the absence of conflict, but the wisdom to wield it. The Orphic mysteries whispered a darker, more primal version of the Titanomachy, one where the young god Dionysus Zagreus, not Zeus, stood at the heart of the cosmic struggle. Born of Zeus's union with Persephone, this radiant child was destined to rule the cosmos, his laughter shaking the stars. But the Titans, still seething from their defeat, refused to bow to another upstart god. Envious of his vitality and divine fire, they lured the boy god away from his guardians with cunning distractions, mirrors, spinning tops, and other toys that glimmered with false allure. Then, when his attention was ensnared, they pounced. What followed wasn't just murder, it was annihilation. The Titans tore Dionysus Zagreus limb from limb, devouring his flesh in a gruesome feast. His heart alone escaped, rescued by Athena and later reborn into a new incarnation. But the horror of this act rippled through existence. Zeus, enraged by their sacrilege, blasted the Titans to ashes with his thunderbolts, and from those ashes humanity arose. Here lies the Orphic twist. We are not just creatures of clay or divine breath, but a paradoxical fusion of titanic sin and Dionysian divinity. The Titans' crime became our inheritance, their violence etched into our bones, yet the spark of the devoured god lingers in our souls. This myth wasn't just a story, it was the foundation of a secret spiritual path. Orphic initiates believed that life was a pilgrimage to purify the titanic stain within us. Through rituals, asceticism, and the imbibing of sacred kykeon, a barley and mint potion symbolizing Dionysus's flesh, they sought to awaken the dormant divine fragment, shedding their titanic nature like a serpent's skin. Gold tablets buried with followers inscribed cryptic instructions for the afterlife. Tell Persephone that Bacchus himself has freed you. To the Orphics, death wasn't an end, but the final separation of gold from dross, Zagreus's light from the Titan's shadow. The echoes of this duality resonate far beyond ancient Greece. Compare it to the Gnostic belief in trapped divine sparks within a material world crafted by a flawed demiurge. Or the Christian concept of original sin, a fallen state requiring redemption. Even modern psychology grapples with this tension. Carl Jung's shadow work mirroring the Orphic struggle to integrate our brutal and transcendent halves. The Titan's feast, then, becomes more than myth. It's a lens through which we still examine the human condition, part monster, part god, forever caught between ascent and ruin. What's haunting is how the Orphics framed salvation. Unlike mainstream Greek religion, where fate was immutable, they offered a path to transcendence. By ritually reenacting Dionysus Zagreus's dismemberment and rebirth, initiates symbolically reversed the Titan's crime, turning the act that birthed humanity into the key to its liberation. The dismembered god's laughter, they believed, could still be heard in the clatter of cymbals, the crush of grapes, the ecstatic cry of a devotee breaking free. His suffering wasn't just a tragedy, it was an invitation written in blood and starlight to remember what we were and what we might yet become. The earth was raw and unfinished when the rainbow serpent first stirred beneath the dry riverbeds of the dreaming. To the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, this wasn't just a mythic creature, it was the land itself given form. A being of iridescent scales and impossible length that carved valleys with its coils and filled them with water from its own body. But creation was never a peaceful process. As the serpent slithered across the primordial landscape, it clashed with other ancestral beings, each wielding their own power to shape the world. These battles weren't mere conflicts, they were the birth pangs of geography, every confrontation leaving scars that became mountains, rivers, and deserts. One such struggle erupted with the eaglehawk, a mighty creator being whose wings blotted out the sun. When the serpent's winding path disrupted eaglehawk's hunting grounds, the skies darkened with their rage. Their battle sent shockwaves through the earth. The serpent's thrashing tail scooped out the basin of Lake Eyre, while eaglehawk's talons scraped deep gashes into the Kimberley cliffs. Yet neither could claim victory. Exhausted, they struck a truce. The serpent would keep the waterways, but eaglehawk's children would forever rule the skies. This tension still echoes in the Australian outback, where flash floods surge through dry riverbeds, only to vanish again beneath the hawk's shadow. Further north, the rainbow serpent faced a different foe, the crocodile man, a shape-shifting trickster who sought to steal the serpent's songs of creation. Their duel played out in the mangrove swamps, where the crocodile man's teeth snapped at the serpent's flickering scales, only to be outwitted at every turn. In one decisive moment, the serpent coiled around a towering gum tree and sang a melody so powerful it split the trunk in two. The halves became the first didgeridoos, their resonant drone trapping the crocodile man's voice inside. Today, when Aboriginal elders play these instruments, they say you can still hear the echoes of that ancient battle, the serpent's triumph preserved in every vibrating note. What makes these stories extraordinary is how they're anchored in tangible landscapes. The Arnhem Land rock paintings depicting the serpent's wars aren't just art, they're maps and historical records. A zigzag line might trace the path of a lightning strike from a long-ago skirmish with the Thunder Brothers, while a circular depression in the bedrock is said to be the imprint where the serpent rested after subduing the honey ant ancestors. These details transform the entire continent into a living archive where every landform tells a chapter of the dreaming. Yet the rainbow serpent's battles aren't just about dominance. In the Yolngu traditions, when the serpent fought the fire woman near Blue Mud Bay, their struggle wasn't for territory but for balance. The serpent's water quenched the fire woman's flames, but her heat forced the serpent to shed its skin, birthing the monsoons that revitalized the land each year. This cyclical conflict embodies a truth deeper than victory or defeat, that creation requires friction. Without these battles, there would be no wet and dry seasons, no floodplains teeming with life, no intricately woven ecosystems. Modern science unknowingly mirrors these truths. Geologists confirm that the serpentine courses of Australia's rivers align with fault lines, cracks in the continent's crust where titanic pressures once clashed. Ecologists note how fire-adapted flora thrive in cycles of destruction and renewal, just as the serpent and fire woman ordained. The Aboriginals' law of the land insists these stories aren't metaphors but ongoing relationships. When miners disrupt sacred sites, elders warn of the rainbow serpent's wrath in the form of droughts or floods. In 2019, when Ulru's climbing ban took effect after decades of campaigning, it wasn't just a political victory, it was a homecoming, the serpent's resting place finally respected after generations of trespass. The genius of these myths lies in their refusal to simplify. The rainbow serpent isn't purely benevolent or destructive, it's both life-giver and tempest, its moods shaping the land as inevitably as wind shapes stone. Its wars with other creator beings aren't clashes of good versus evil, but of competing necessities: fire against water, sky against earth, stillness against motion. To walk through Australia with these stories is to see a land alive with memory, where every contour whispers, "This happened here and it matters still." The dreaming isn't a past event, it's a continuum, and the serpent's battles rage on in the slow grind of tectonic plates and the sudden violence of bushfires, reminding us that creation is never finished. It's a work in progress written in the land's own hand. The line between gods and giants in Norse mythology was never as clear as the towering walls of Asgard might suggest. While Thor's hammer Mjolnir crushed countless Jötnar skulls, and Odin's schemes often targeted their kind, the sagas whisper of something far more tangled, a web of alliances, marriages, and uneasy truces that bound the Aesir and Jötnar together in ways that defied simple rivalry. Take Loki, the most infamous border crosser of them all, blood brother to Odin, father of monsters, and himself half-giant. His very existence proves that the divide was porous, that the realms bled into one another despite the thunder god's best efforts. Thor's vendetta against the giants wasn't just mindless violence, it was a desperate attempt to shore up a crumbling boundary. Every time he journeyed to Jotunheimr, whether to retrieve his stolen hammer or to humble the boastful Utgar, the Loki, he wasn't just flexing divine muscle. He was performing a cosmic balancing act, pushing back against the entropy that threatened to dissolve the order the gods had built. Yet even he couldn't escape the pull of these connections. His own mother, Jörd, was a giantess, and his wife Sif might have shared that lineage. The giants weren't just enemies, they were in-laws, ancestors, and sometimes reluctant partners. The gods' dependence on the Jötnar ran deeper than family ties. When Asgard's walls needed rebuilding after the First War, it was a giant mason who offered his services and nearly claimed the sun, moon, and Freya as payment before Loki's interference. The mead of poetry, the source of divine inspiration, brewed from the blood of the wise giant Aesir. Even Thor's legendary strength relied on artifacts forged by giant hands, his belt Medjingjöð, his iron gloves, the very hammer he swung against his kin. The irony is palpable. The gods' power was built on gifts from those they scorned. Perhaps the most revealing alliance was the one that ended the world. At Ragnarök, when the fire giant Surtur marched on Asgard, he wasn't acting alone. Loki, freed from his chains, led an army of the dead alongside his monstrous children. But the real betrayal came from within. The wolf Fenrir and the serpent Jormungandr, both born of giants and gods, fulfilled their destinies by tearing apart the very order their parents had tried to maintain. The lesson is stark. You can't wage war against a force you're bound to by blood and magic. The giants weren't just adversaries, they were the inevitable reckoning, the chaos the gods had tried and failed to fully suppress. Yet even in the aftermath, the cycle continued. The surviving Aesir, including Thor's sons, would inherit a world where the old divisions no longer held. The new earth rising from the sea would be one where the lines between god and giant blurred beyond recognition. Maybe that was the real tragedy, not the destruction, but the realization that the struggle had been futile all along. The walls were never high enough, the hammer blows never decisive enough, because the enemy wasn't just out there. They were in the gods' halls, their beds, their very blood. Thor spent his life fighting giants, but in the end, he was always one step away from becoming what he hated most. From the thunderous clashes of Olympus to the serpentine wars of the dreaming, one truth echoes across every culture's myths: creation is born from conflict. Whether it's Zeus toppling the Titans, Marduk carving the world from Tiamat's corpse, or the rainbow serpent shaping rivers through elemental battles, these stories share a startling pattern. Order doesn't emerge gently. It's wrested from chaos through struggle, often bloody, always transformative. The Norse called it Ragnarök, the Aztecs the fifth sun's birth, but the underlying message is universal. Destruction and renewal are two sides of the same cosmic coin. Generational strife weaves through these myths like a crimson thread. Younger gods overthrow their elders, not just for power, but to redefine the rules of existence. The Greek Titanomachy, the Kumarbi cycles, divine castrations, even Susanu's rebellion against Amaterasu, all reveal a deep-seated anxiety about progress and the price of change. Yet these conflicts are never clean breaks. The old order lingers in the bones of the new. The Titans' ashes birthed humanity in Orphic lore, while the Fomorians' agricultural wisdom lived on under Tuatha Dé rule. It's as if these cultures understood that innovation requires both rebellion and reconciliation, a delicate dance between erasing and preserving. Perhaps most fascinating is how these battles map onto human fears and hopes. Cosmic wars aren't just entertainment, they're frameworks for understanding natural disasters, political upheavals, even personal struggles. When Indra's Vajra splits the drought serpent Vritra, it mirrors the monsoon's return. The war in heaven's moral dualism shaped theological debates about free will. Even the hero twins' ballgame against Xibalba's lords becomes a metaphor for overcoming life's impossible odds. These myths endure because they're more than stories. They're survival tools, teaching us to face chaos with courage, adaptability, and sometimes a well-timed trick. What's your favorite mythic clash? Maybe it's Thor's endless vendetta against the giants, or the Jade Emperor's chess match with the Monkey King. Drop it in the comments. We're all inheritors of these ancient battles, finding meaning in their echoes every time we weather a storm, challenge the status quo, or rebuild from ruins. After all, the gods may have fought in the heavens, but their wars live on.